Ivy Harris was last seen alive talking to an unidentified man outside of a Waikiki bar.
The body of a missing Portland tourist was found in a brushy area near a Hawaiian coastline, and her family tells us they are sure she was murdered while she was on her birthday vacation.
I just don't know how to go on from here. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fight for her.
May 16th, 2013, the doors slide open and a young woman steps in. She is laughing. The man beside her is laughing too. She leans into him. He leans back. The elevator begins to rise, and in the last second before the doors close fully, they kiss. That is the last image that exists of Ivana Harris alive. 4 days later, a boy out exploring a remote stretch of Oahu's western coast and finds something that will never leave him. A body. Naked. Hidden at the bottom of a hill in one of the most isolated corners of the island. Miles from the tourist crowds, miles from the bars, miles from the camera in the elevator where she was last seen laughing. This is the story of what happened in the hours between a kiss and a duffel bag, and it is the story of the one thing the killer never planned for, that she would fight back hard enough to leave her mark on him. Waikiki in the spring is almost aggressively beautiful, the kind of beautiful that makes you forget the rest of the world exists, that makes you lower your guard, that makes you believe, just for a moment, that nothing bad can happen here. Every year, millions of people arrive carrying that exact belief, and most of them leave with it intact. Ivy came here to celebrate turning 29. She had flown to Honolulu with her boyfriend Mark and her friend Jillian. The trip had a simple purpose, the way all birthday trips do. Sunday water, good company, a reason to be happy. That afternoon, she went to the beach and took photos and texted her mother back in Portland to tell her she was having a great time. Her mother read the text and smiled, knowing her daughter was somewhere warm and safe, knowing she was happy. That was one of the last messages she would ever receive from her. That evening, the three of them headed back to their hotel to rest and get ready. They were going out to hit the bars in Waikiki, celebrate properly, make it a night Ivy would remember. Around 1 a.m. on May 16th, Ivy got restless. Mark and Jillian were still getting ready, taking their time the way people do when the night feels infinite and there is no reason to rush. Ivy did not want to wait. She told them she was heading out to Kelly O'Neill's, a well-known bar nearby, and that she would meet them there. I'll see you there. Those were essentially her last words to them. She walked out of the hotel room expecting to be reunited with them within a couple of hours. She had no reason to think otherwise. No reason to be afraid. No idea in any corner of her mind that she was walking toward the last night of her life. The surveillance cameras at Kelly O'Neill's captured footage of Ivy walking up to the bar around 3 a.m. There is no evidence she ever went inside. Bar employees had no memory of seeing her. She appeared on the outdoor camera, and then she was gone. At some point in the space between arriving and disappearing, she connected with a man, not inside the bar, outside it. In the space between the music and the street, in the kind of moment that happens 1,000 times a night in Waikiki and almost never leads anywhere dangerous. Detective Drew Akagi caught the case from the start. He knew that finding Ivy, or finding out what happened to her, would require the kind of methodical, unglamorous work that solves most cases quietly, without drama. Waikiki is one of the most surveilled areas in all of Hawaii. Hotels, bars, ATMs, street corners. If Ivy had been anywhere in that neighborhood in the hours she was missing, there was a reasonable chance she had been captured on video. Akagi started pulling footage. He contacted every hotel in the area. He obtained subpoenas. He sat down and began working through hours of video, face by face, frame by frame, looking for any sign of Ivana Harris. And he found her. 3 a.m. The lobby camera of the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel. Ivy, walking through the entrance, not alone. A man was beside her. Akagi watched as they crossed the lobby together, as they approached the elevator, as the doors opened and they stepped inside. And then he saw the kiss. That moment, right there, was where the investigation cracked open. Because Ivy had come to Hawaii with her boyfriend Mark. So who was this man? Why was she kissing someone else in an elevator at 3:41 in the morning? Akagi kept watching. 5 a.m, the same elevator, the same camera. The man steps back in, and this time he is alone. He is carrying something, a large rolling duffel bag. Akagi watched him struggle with it, watched it catch in the elevator doors, watched him finally maneuver it into position, and when the man stood there in the elevator, waiting for the doors to close, the way he held himself, the way the bag sat at his feet, made something very clear. That bag was heavy, very heavy. But it was the man's appearance that stopped Akagi cold. In Hawaii in May, when temperatures regularly sit in the 80s, This man was wearing jeans and a long-sleeve shirt. He had on a floppy bucket hat with a wide brim, the tag still hanging off the back, as if he had purchased it specifically for this moment. And for the entire duration of his time in that elevator, he kept his back to the camera. He stood facing the corner, never once turning around. He knew exactly where the lens was. The footage continued. He exited the elevator and walked to the valet parking area where a white SUV was waiting. A valet approached and offered to help with the bag. The man waved him off. He tried to lift the bag into the trunk. He struggled. Visibly, it took him several attempts to get it loaded, and when he finally did, the vehicle sagged under the weight. Akagi felt his stomach drop. He already suspected what was in that bag. 9 a.m. Same hotel, same elevator, same man, still wearing the jeans, still wearing the long-sleeve shirt, still wearing the bucket hat pulled low over his face. But this time, there was no duffel bag, just a small white towel in his hand. Akagi laid out the timeline. 3 a.m, the man enters the elevator with Ivy. They kiss. 5 a.m, the man leaves alone, carrying a bag so heavy he can barely lift it into an SUV. 9 a.m, he returns. No bag. 3 hours and 16 minutes between leaving and coming back. Where had he gone? What had he done with that bag? And where was Ivy? 4 days later, a young boy exploring the area near Makua Cave on Oahu's western tip answered the last question. He was out in the brush, in the remote, beautiful, isolated stretch of coastline, far from the crowds and the cameras and the cheerful noise of Waikiki, and he found her, hidden at the bottom of a hill, naked, exposed to 4 days of Hawaii's tropical heat. When Honolulu homicide detectives arrived, they found the remains of a young Black woman. The advanced decomposition made specific forensic findings difficult, but the medical examiner could establish one thing with certainty. Ivy had died from an injury to her neck. She had been identified through her tattoos and fingerprints. It was Ivana Harris. Now, Akagi had a body, he had footage, he had a timeline, but he still had a faceless man in a bucket hat who had never once turned toward a camera, who had bought a prepaid phone for his trip, who had paid cash wherever possible, who had done every small thing that a person does when they are trying not to be found. He needed a name. He pulled the ping data from the prepaid phone, the record showing which cell towers it had connected to and when. At 8 a.m. on May 16th, 2 hours after the man left the hotel with the duffel bag, that phone had pinged off a tower on the Waianae coast. Remote. Isolated. A few miles from Makua Cave, the exact location where Ivy's body would be found 4 days later. But here was the detail that made Akagi certain. The phone pinged that same location again later that same day. 2 separate trips to the same remote area on the day Ivy disappeared. Akagi's read was straightforward. The man had driven out early that morning to scout, to find the right place. Then he had gone back to the hotel, and then he had returned later that night, in the dark, to finish what he had started. Rental car records confirmed the scope of it. The man had put over 400 miles on his white SUV during just 5 days on an island where you can drive the full perimeter in a few hours. 400 miles. He had been driving in circles, searching, looking for the right spot to bury what he had done. Akagi went back to the hotel's reservation system and started cross-referencing. He was looking for a specific profile, a guest who had checked in alone, a guest who had declined housekeeping service, the most logical precaution if you do not want anyone walking into your room. A guest who matched the physical description from the footage. One name surfaced, room 924, checked in alone, no housekeeping requested, and when Akagi compared the check-in footage to the footage of the man with the duffel bag, it was not a close call. Same posture, same sunglasses pushed up on his head, same man. Now he had a name. Before I tell you who he was, I need to go back and answer the question that has been hanging over the story since the elevator footage. The question of who Ivy was in those final hours and why she was in that hotel with a man who was not her boyfriend. Because the answer to that question is the key to everything that followed, including the thing that nobody saw coming. As investigators dug deeper into the days leading up to Ivy's disappearance, they uncovered the full shape of her life in a way her family had never discussed publicly. Ivy made her living as a traveling escort. She posted advertisements online to connect with clients in various cities. She did not hide this from the people closest to her. It was how she survived, how she paid for the life she was building towards something better, something different. The college enrollment, the move back to Portland, the closer proximity to her mother who texted her every day, and her boyfriend Mark, whose full name was Mark Miles Jr., his relationship with Ivy was more complicated than the word boyfriend suggests. Mark was her pimp. He and Ivy had traveled together along with Jillian, who also worked as an escort, running a mobile operation that moved through Hawaii, Alaska, Idaho, Minnesota, and Nevada. On May 11th, 2013, just 5 days before she disappeared, Ivy and Jillian had posted an advertisement online marketing their escort services in Waikiki. This trip to Hawaii was not only a birthday vacation, it was also work. So when Ivy left the hotel alone that night and walked toward Kelly O'Neill's and never went inside, she was not simply going to meet her friends at a bar. She was looking for clients. And at some point in the early hours of May 16th, she connected with the man who would end her life. I am telling you this because it matters for understanding what happened. Every detail of it matters, but I want to be absolutely clear about something, and I will not move past it quickly. None of this, not one single detail about Ivy's work, about her relationship with Mark, about the advertisement, about any of it. None of it means she deserved what happened to her. None of it makes her death less devastating. None of it makes her less worthy of the justice that was coming. Ivy was 28 years old. She was planning to go back to school. She was saving money to move home to Portland to be closer to her mother. She had a mother who loved her and texted her every single day, and who, on May 15th, had read a message from her daughter saying she was having a great time and had smiled and had no idea it was almost the last word she would ever receive. The choices a person makes to survive do not determine the value of their life. Now, the name on the reservation for room 924, Nathaniel Cosby. Detective Akagi ran the name and stopped. Nathaniel Cosby was not some random tourist who had drifted into Waikiki looking for trouble. He was not a drifter. He was not a man with a history of violence or a record that would have flagged him anywhere. He was a master sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, 38 years old, 17 years of military service, beginning in 1996. His specialty was one of the most demanding and respected roles in the entire military: explosive ordnance disposal, a bomb technician, a man trained to stay calm in the most lethal circumstances imaginable, trained to think clearly when every instinct would tell an ordinary person to run. He was assigned to Marine Wing Support Squadron 171 in the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, based out of Iwakuni, Japan. At the time of Ivy's death, he was in Hawaii on a temporary duty assignment. On paper, Nathaniel Cosby was the kind of service member the military holds up as an example. Nearly 2 decades of dedication, a position requiring security clearances, specialized training, significant institutional trust, the kind of career that is built on discipline, on following the rules, on being the person others depend on when everything goes wrong. And now he was the prime suspect in the murder of Ivana Harris. June 3rd, 2013, Honolulu International Airport. Police arrested Nathaniel Cosby as he was preparing to depart. They brought him in for questioning, and he came in with a story already shaped. He admitted he had picked Ivy up outside a Waikiki bar. He admitted he had hired her as an escort. He admitted they had gone back to his room at the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel together. He admitted he had spent the night with her. He denied killing her. Then the detectives opened their laptops and started showing him the footage. The elevator at 3 a.m. Him and Ivy. The kiss. The doors closing. The elevator at 5 a.m. Him alone. The duffel bag. The struggling. The weight of it. The vehicle sagging in the valet lot. The elevator at 9 a.m. Him returning. No bag. Just the small white towel. Cosby watched the footage. And then he stopped talking. He invoked his right to remain silent and requested a lawyer. Here is where the case got complicated in a way nobody had anticipated. In Hawaii, prosecutors have 48 hours after an arrest to file formal charges. The DNA evidence that could definitively link Ivy to the duffel bag, the biological material that would put her inside the bag beyond any reasonable doubt, was not ready. DNA analysis takes time. Months, in some cases. Without that forensic confirmation in hand, prosecutors were not prepared to move. Cosby was released. Not freed entirely. He was temporarily reassigned to Marine Corps Base Hawaii in Kaneohe, where, according to a Marine Corps spokesman, he was free to come and go like all other Marines. A man who had been on surveillance footage, leaving a hotel with what investigators believed was a dead woman inside a bag, walking free on a military base, waiting for lab results to catch up with what the cameras had already shown. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the NCIS, took jurisdiction from Honolulu Police, transitioning the case from civilian to military authority. And then everyone waited. 3 months later, the results arrived. The DNA swabs taken from inside Nathaniel Cosby's duffel bag matched Ivana Harris. But that was not all. Inside that bag, investigators had also found fragments of Ivy's fingernails and strands of hair from her wig. Sit with that for a moment. Not the DNA match. which is clinical, which is a number on a report, sit with the fingernails. Her nails were broken inside his bag. That is not what happens to someone who dies quietly. That is not what happens to someone who is simply there when death arrives. Broken fingernails inside a closed bag mean one thing. She had fought, she had clawed at her attacker, at the bag, at anything she could reach in the dark. Ivy Harris had not gone quietly. She had struggled with everything she had, desperately, in the final moments of her life, and she had left evidence of that struggle behind her. There was more. Video footage from an ATM camera captured Cosby the day before he left Hawaii. On that footage, clearly visible above his right eyebrow, was a large, fresh wound, distinct, unmistakable. Ivy had left her mark on him. While he was choking the life out of her, she had reached up and clawed at his face. She had injured him. She had marked the man who killed her, and that mark had followed him to an ATM camera the next day, and it would follow him all the way into a courtroom. Master Sergeant Nathaniel Cosby was formally charged with murder, obstruction of justice, and patronizing a prostitute. An Article 32 hearing, the military equivalent of a preliminary hearing, was convened to determine whether the evidence was sufficient for a court-martial. The military judge reviewed everything Akagi had built: the footage, the cell phone pings, the rental car mileage, the DNA, the fingernails, the wound on the face, probable cause. Nathaniel Cosby would stand trial. The court-martial began in April 2014. Military courts-martial do not use civilian juries. They use military panels composed of active duty service members who understand rank and duty and the obligations that come with wearing a uniform. An 8-member panel was assembled to hear the evidence against the Master Sergeant. The prosecution presented their case with the same methodical patience Akagi had used to build it. They walked the panel through the surveillance footage, frame by frame. The elevator at 3 a.m, the duffel bag at 5, the return at 9. They presented the cell phone data, the tower pings on the Waianae coast, the 2 separate trips to the area where Ivy's body was ultimately found. They presented the rental car records, 400 miles on a small island in 5 days. They presented the DNA evidence, Ivy's biological material inside the bag, her fingernail fragments, her hair. They presented the ATM footage with the wound above his eyebrow, and then they let the medical examiner testify. This is where the self-defense argument collapsed, because Cosby's defense team had built their entire strategy around a single claim. He had hired Ivy. After their encounter, she had demanded more money than they had agreed upon. When he tried to leave, she had allegedly pulled out a lipstick knife, a small blade concealed inside a lipstick case, and slashed at him. In response, Cosby claimed he had put her in a chokehold. He was only trying to restrain her. He did not mean to kill her. When he realized she was dead, he panicked. He disposed of her body because he was embarrassed, because he did not want to bring shame to his family or to the Marine Corps. That was his story. A trained bomb technician, a man with 17 years of experience, staying calm under extreme pressure, who had accidentally killed a woman while simply trying to hold her still. The medical examiner looked at the panel and testified to what the evidence showed. Ivy had not died from a stab wound. She had died from an injury to her neck, consistent with strangulation. She had been choked to death, not cut, not stabbed, not injured, in a struggle where a knife was the central weapon. The fatal injury was to her neck, and it had been applied with enough sustained force to kill her. When pressed during proceedings to describe the struggle in detail, Cosby could not do it coherently. He described it as chaos. He could not explain the sequence of events in a way that held together. He could not account for how a defensive chokehold applied by a man with his training had resulted in a dead woman inside a bag in his hotel room. The prosecution's closing drove the point to its final destination. Ivana Harris had not died of a stab wound. She had been strangled by Nathaniel Cosby, and she had fought back with everything she had, leaving her DNA in his bag and her mark on his face. After she was dead, he had driven around this island for hours, over 400 miles of road, looking for a place remote enough to dispose of her like she was garbage, like she was nothing. Like the 28 years of her life, the mother who texted her every day, the plans to go back to school and come home to Portland, like none of it had ever mattered or existed. She deserved better than that. She deserved justice. The panel deliberated. They reviewed the surveillance footage. They reviewed the cell phone data. They reviewed the DNA results and the medical examiner's testimony and Cosby's own contradictory account of a struggle he could not describe and a death he claimed not to have intended. And they returned their verdict. Guilty of unpremeditated murder. Guilty of obstruction of justice. Guilty of patronizing a prostitute. The panel rejected the self-defense claim entirely. They did not believe that a trained Marine, a bomb disposal expert with 17 years of experience in extreme environments, had accidentally killed a 128-pound, 28-year-old woman while simply trying to restrain her. They believed he had strangled her. They believed he had panicked when she was dead. They believed he had stuffed her body into a duffel bag, driven around the island in the dark looking for a place far enough from the hotel that she might not be found, and left her in the brush at the bottom of a hill near Makua Cave, naked, in a spot where he hoped the tropical heat and the isolation would erase what he had done before anyone thought to look there. He had been right about almost everything. He had not counted on Detective Akagi pulling every piece of surveillance footage in Waikiki. He had not counted on the cell tower data placing his phone at the dump site twice on the same day. He had not counted on a young boy deciding to explore that particular stretch of brush 4 days later. And he had not counted on Ivy. He had not counted on the fingernails. He had not counted on the strand of hair from her wig. He had not counted on the wound she left on his face, recorded on an ATM camera the very next day, walking around in public as if it meant nothing, not realizing that she had already done what investigators needed her to do. She had marked him. The military panel's sentencing recommendation left no ambiguity about how they viewed what Nathaniel Cosby had done. Life in prison, no possibility of parole, dishonorable discharge from the United States Marine Corps, 17 years of military service, gone. Every rank, every commendation, every security clearance, every benefit that came with nearly 2 decades of wearing the uniform, stripped away completely. Master Sergeant Nathaniel Cosby would spend the rest of his life inside the United States Military Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the Department of Defense's only maximum security prison. In August 2014, the commander of United States Marine Corps forces in the Pacific reviewed the panel's recommendation and upheld it in full. Cosby appealed. The appeals were unsuccessful. The conviction stood. The sentence stood. While the court-martial was reaching its conclusion, a separate investigation had been running in parallel, one that would close the final open chapter of Ivy's story. Mark Miles Jr., the man who had traveled to Hawaii with Ivy as her boyfriend and her pimp, became the target of a federal investigation called Operation Traffic Stop, a coordinated effort by the FBI to crack down on Portland area pimps who were moving women across state lines for prostitution. Miles was one of 10 individuals indicted as part of the operation. Federal prosecutors charged him with violating the Mann Act and the Travel Act, specifically for transporting women from Portland to Hawaii, Alaska, Idaho, Minnesota, and Nevada for the purpose of prostitution. In federal court in Portland, Oregon, Mark Miles Jr. pleaded guilty to human trafficking charges. He admitted to transporting Ivana Harris across state lines to engage in prostitution. He received 3 years in federal prison. The most striking moment in the entire proceeding came at Miles's sentencing hearing. Ivy's parents showed up, not to condemn him, to support him. Her father, Marion Ivan Greer, made a statement outside the courthouse after the hearing that carried the full weight of a grief that had been living inside him for over a year. That man didn't make her do nothing. They were trying to taste that pot of gold. Both of them were out of line, and it was all done for nothing. A father's grief is not always a clean thing. It does not always take the shape you expect. Sometimes it contains recognition alongside love, and anger alongside loss, and the acknowledgement that the daughter you adored made choices that led her somewhere you could not follow and could not save her from. Marion Greer stood outside a federal courthouse in Portland and said the complicated, human, unpolished thing, and it was more honest than anything that had been spoken in either courtroom. Both of them were out of line, and it was all done for nothing. Some sources report that at the time of her death, Ivy was 4 weeks pregnant. She would have turned 29 on May 20th. Instead, on May 20th, a boy found her body in the brush. There's a camera in the elevator of the Aston Waikiki Beach Hotel. It watched her come in laughing, leaning into a man who had already decided what was going to happen. It watched him leave with a bag that should not have been that heavy. And it watched him come back in the morning, calm, with a small white towel, as if the night had been unremarkable, as if nothing had changed, as if a woman had not clawed at his face and fought for her life and lost. The camera saw all of it, and so did Ivy, in the only way that ultimately mattered. She saw him coming, she fought back, she broke her own fingernails, clawing at the bag he put her in. She left a wound above his eye that he carried around publicly for days without realizing it was going to be the piece of evidence that walked him into a courtroom. She did not survive, but she made sure he could not hide. Ivana Harris, 28 years old, from Portland, Oregon. She was planning to go home. She was planning to be closer to her mother, who texted her every single day, who on the morning of May 15th had received a message saying her daughter was happy, somewhere warm, somewhere beautiful, having the kind of time a person deserves on the eve of their birthday. That was true. All of it was true at the same time. She was happy, and she was working, and she was planning a future, and she was in an elevator at 3:41 in the morning with a man who had already bought the bag. And she fought. That is the last thing the camera saw before the doors closed, before the numbers climbed, before the night turned into something that a boy in the brush would stumble upon 4 days later and never forget. She was laughing. She walked into a grocery store at 3 in the afternoon carrying a 1-year-old on her hip and a 3-year-old by the hand. The cameras caught every second of it. She picked out food, she paid, she walked out into the summer air with her boys beside her. 2 hours later, someone beat her to death. And the question that would haunt every person connected to this case, every detective, every juror, every neighbor who saw that white van and thought nothing of it, was not only who did it, it was whether the woman convicted of doing it was even capable of lifting the weapon. This is the case of Jessica Morrison, a 21-year-old mother, 16 weeks pregnant, found on the roadside of a quiet rural loop in eastern Tennessee on an August evening in 2016. A case where the blood evidence was undeniable, where the conviction came swiftly, and where, years later, the more you looked at the facts, the more questions kept surfacing that no one in that courtroom was ever asked to answer. On the evening of August 12th, 2016, a man named Donald Kahn Jr. took his dog for a walk on Judge Neal Loop. It is a short road, 1 lane, a circle, 4 or 5 houses, and not much else. People dumped things down by the creek sometimes. Donald knew that. Animal carcasses, trash, the kind of thing rural roads quietly absorb without anyone making a report. It was about 7:30 in the evening, still light enough to see clearly. What Donald found that night was not trash. Lying next to 2 trees, near a barbed wire fence in the wooded edge of the road, was the body of a young woman. He stood at least 6 feet back. He did not need to get closer to understand what he was looking at. He walked home and called 911. By 9:30 p.m., Greene County Sheriff's Department Detective James Randolph was on scene. What he found told an immediate story of violence. The victim was a younger woman. She had suffered what appeared to be significant head trauma. Reddish-brown stains marked her clothing. Bruises ran along her arms. There were cuts on her hands. One finger, the ring finger on her right hand, appeared to be broken. Detective Randolph noted one other thing almost immediately. The wooded area where she lay was almost certainly not where she had been killed. There was no evidence of a struggle at the scene, no blood trail leading in, no signs that what had happened to her had happened there. She had been brought here after. There was no identification on her body. That would not remain the case for long. At roughly midnight, a concerned mother and a man identified as her daughter's fiancé arrived at the Greenville police station. They had been trying to reach 21-year-old Jessica Morrison for hours. Jessica was a mother of 2 young boys, aged 1 and 3. She had left them with their grandmother that afternoon and had never come home. They were initially told it was too soon to file a missing persons report. And then law enforcement matched the tattoos in the photos Tammy Morrison showed them at the station to the young woman lying on Judge Neal Loop. Jessica had been 16 weeks pregnant. The autopsy results removed any ambiguity about what had been done to her. Jessica Morrison died as a result of multiple blunt force injuries to the head. She had abrasions and contusions to her chest and back. The ring finger on her right hand was fractured. Investigators concluded the blows had been delivered by a tire iron or something similar. The murder weapon was never found. But what investigators did find, scattered across several roads in the surrounding area, painted a picture of chaos and movement. On Tim Gray Road, they recovered a pair of shorts, a diaper, and paperwork tied to Jessica's eldest son's doctor's appointment that morning. The boy had undergone oral surgery. On Babs Mill Road, pieces of her cell phone cover, a medical wristband with her child's name on it, pieces of her driver's license, a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, a bag of cereal. On Betsy Ross Road, about 3 miles from Judge Neal Loop, medical paperwork for the 3-year-old. Her belongings had been scattered across miles of rural road, as though someone had driven and discarded, moving fast and trying to leave nothing behind. Tammy Morrison and Gary Eli, Jessica's fiancé, had already been piecing together her final movements before they even went to police. The last person to see Jessica alive, they said, was a woman named Vonda Smith. Vonda was 50 years old at the time. She worked as an insurance clerk at Lafayette Hospital, a job she had held for 25 years. She was the mother of a man named William Smith, who had been briefly involved with Jessica several years earlier. That relationship, a 2 to 3 week fling, by William's own accounting, had produced one child, 3-year-old Channing. William and Jessica had not been romantically involved since, he maintained. But Vonda, the grandmother, had remained a steady, devoted presence in the lives of both boys and in Jessica's life. She babysat, she paid bills, she showed up when Jessica needed her. On the day of the murder, this is what Vonda Smith told Detective Randolph had happened. Jessica turned up at her workplace around 1 in the afternoon. The youngest boy, Camden, was only a year old and was acting out. She needed help. Vonda left work. The two of them went together to Food City to buy groceries for Jessica and the boys. Surveillance footage at the store confirmed this visit between 3:07 and 3:43 p.m. The groceries were dropped off at the home Jessica shared with Gary and his father, J.D. Eli. The bags were still sitting unpacked when Tammy arrived later looking for her daughter. After the grocery drop, Vonda said she gave Jessica money, approximately $1,000, to help with outstanding bills, her car payment, rent, phone minutes, lights. Jessica's utilities had been cut off that day. Vonda paid to have them restored. She also gave Jessica the keys to her own car, a white Pontiac Sunfire, so Jessica could go run these errands. And that was the last time Vonda physically saw her. It was 2 in the morning when Detective Randolph and his colleague arrived at the home Vonda shared with her husband, Roger, on Davis Valley Road, 3 to 4 miles from the loop where Jessica had been found. Randolph had to tell Vonda Smith that the mother of her grandson was dead. The detectives recorded what followed.
We need to talk to you for just a minute.
Me?
Yeah, we got to give you some information.
What is it, honey?
She's, if you read what it takes, she's dead.
How do you know?
Is there anything you can think of to help us?
And Jessie's dead? I did not see her.
The response lands strangely, not grief in any recognizable shape, not the collapse or the sharp intake of breath. A defense, almost immediately. She's always like that, she's fake. And then the affirmation, Jessie's dead, as though she is confirming something she has already been told. And then, quietly, I did not see her. Not, I cannot believe it. Not what happened. Not who did this. I did not see her. Detectives noted this. When Detective Randolph asked Vonda to walk through the day, her account diverged immediately from what Tammy had told police. Tammy had claimed Vonda drove Jessica home. Vonda said nothing of the kind. She said she gave Jessica the car and watched her leave to pay bills. At about 6:30 that evening, she said her Sunfire was returned to her, parked at the end of the driveway outside her house. She told detectives she observed a white van pull up at the same time. A man she assumed was Gary Eli got out of her car and into the white van, and both vehicles left. She did not see who returned the car. She did not go outside to check.
Like I said, also white van.
And all you know is the van was here and your car was here, but you don't know how your car got here.
Like I said, I did not see Jen, literally see her when they brought my car.
She describes the van with the passive detachment of someone recounting weather. A van was here. Your car was here. She draws the boundary of her own knowledge deliberately, precisely, in a way that is either deeply honest or very carefully constructed. The detectives then asked to search the car. Vonda agreed, but she offered a warning first. The interior smelled of cat urine. Her sister-in-law, Peggy, owned a cat that had relieved itself in the front passenger seat earlier in the week. Vonda had bleached the seats to clean it. The smell, she said, had lingered.
It smells cat piss. Cat piss.
It stinks. And like I said, we cleaned it.
The house?
The car.
Oh, you cleaned the
Because
car.
cat pissed all in it.
When did that happen?
Wednesday.
Wednesday you cleaned it? Oh. So not tonight.
Not tonight. That exchange, buried inside a casual conversation about a cat and a smell, would become one of the most legally significant moments of the entire investigation. Because when the detectives looked at the white Pontiac Sunfire, they found reddish-brown stains on the seat, on the console, and in the corner of the passenger side windshield. Detective Randolph also noticed a circular pattern on the passenger side window that appeared consistent with someone having wiped the glass to clean it. The car was taken to the lab. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation processed it. What they found was blood. DNA analysis confirmed it was Jessica's. The blood in the car drove everything that followed. When combined with the correspondence found on Vonda's cell phone between her and Jessica, investigators arrived at a theory of the crime that they found compelling enough to take before a grand jury. Vonda Smith, they argued, had grown accustomed to caring for Jessica's boys regularly, sometimes 3 to 4 days a week. But more recently, Jessica had been pulling back. She had repaired her relationship with her own mother, Tammy, and had begun spending more time there. She had also been canceling the time Vonda expected with the boys, choosing her own family instead. That weekend, Jessica had abruptly canceled plans for both boys to stay with Vonda. Detectives believed that cancellation was the trigger.
I'm sure she wanted to keep the boy, and Jesse told her no. He had had surgery that morning. And I guess it just got out of hand.
Out of hand. That is the phrase a law enforcement official chose to describe what the medical examiner documented as multiple blunt force blows to the skull of a pregnant 21-year-old who fought hard enough to fracture her own finger trying to defend herself. A Greene County grand jury returned an indictment. Vonda Starr Smith was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for Jessica Morrison and one for her unborn child. But the state's theory came with problems, several of them. The first and most viscerally obvious was physical. 21-year-old Jessica Morrison stood 5 feet 6 inches tall. She was in good health. There were no drugs or alcohol in her system at the time of her death, only a small amount of caffeine. She had defensive wounds on her hands. She had fought back hard. 52-year-old Vonda Smith stood 2 inches shy of 5 feet. That is 147 centimeters. She was in admittedly poor health and overall poor physical condition. And when Detective Randolph visited Vonda's home in the hours after the murder, he observed no scratches, no bruising, no marks of any kind anywhere on her body. Vonda's defense asked the question directly. Could this woman have committed this brutal, sustained attack without a single visible mark being left on her? There was no answer from the prosecution that satisfied everyone in that courtroom. Vonda's defense also moved to challenge the timeline. 2 of Jessica's neighbors, Edward Hitchens and Jason Matthews, each independently placed Jessica at or near her home at around 5 to 5:30 that afternoon. And crucially, each of them also reported seeing a white van at the property around that time. Edward testified he saw 2 men inside a white van at roughly that hour. Jason testified he saw Jessica arrive home in a car at about 5 p.m. and then get into the white van. So who had a white van? Gary, Eli's father, J.D. Eli, had spent the day with a friend named Dudley Hudson. Dudley owned an older work van, white in color. J.D. told police he and Dudley had stopped by the home at around 4:30 or 5 p.m. When he testified in court, however, he revised that time to 3 p.m. J.D. and Dudley provided each other with alibis covering their full movements on August 12th. But J.D.'s credibility took damage on the stand when he was questioned about drug activity and weapons charges pending against him from the previous year. He invoked the Fifth Amendment. He also claimed he had no drugs in his system on the day Jessica was killed. The white van. 2 men inside it. Jessica getting in. A timeline that shifted on the stand under questioning. These were details the defense placed in front of the jury. They argued a second actor, or multiple unknown actors, had never been adequately investigated. The defense also moved to undermine the most damaging piece of physical evidence, the blood in the car and the bleach that had been mixed into it. Vonda's explanation for the cleaning was consistent from the beginning. The cat had urinated in the front passenger seat the previous weekend. Her sister-in-law, Peggy, had suggested using bleach to remove the smell. Vonda said she cleaned the car on Wednesday, days before Jessica's death. Peggy Carter, Vonda's sister-in-law, testified to exactly this. She told the jury that while Vonda was visiting her and her husband the weekend before the murder, they saw her cat exiting the Pontiac Sunfire. Peggy recognized what had happened. The cat had done it before. She later told Roger to try bleach to get the smell out. But more consequential than Peggy's testimony was what happened at 7 p.m. on the evening of the 12th, approximately half an hour before Donald Kahn Jr. found Jessica's body on Judge Neal Loop. Vonda drove her Sunfire to the home of a woman named Sharon Bergner, roughly 20 miles away. Sharon was the grandmother of a 9-year-old girl named Emma, the daughter of Vonda's son, William's girlfriend. Vonda had come to collect Emma for a visit. Sharon Bergner testified that when Vonda arrived, they discussed the cat having urinated in the car. Emma, appropriately disgusted, retrieved a towel from inside the house to sit on before getting into the passenger seat. Sharon stood on both sides of the car during their interaction. Emma climbed inside. Neither of them, Sharon testified, saw any blood stains. She would not have allowed Emma to get into that car had she seen blood on the seats. Half an hour later, Jessica Morrison was found dead on a roadside loop 3 to 4 miles from Vonda's house. If Vonda's car had been used to transport Jessica's body after the killing, the bloodstains had to have already been present when Sharon and Emma stood beside that vehicle and saw nothing. The defense pointed to this as a fundamental impossibility in the prosecution's timeline. Either the blood was there and 2 witnesses missed it, or the blood was not there yet, which meant Vonda had not yet used the car to move the body, which meant the timeline the prosecution was building did not hold together the way they claimed it did. Then came the DNA. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation collected DNA samples from Jessica's body. What they found beneath her fingernails introduced a layer of complexity that the prosecution never satisfactorily resolved. There were at least 3 different DNA profiles recovered from under Jessica's fingernails. All 3 were determined to be male. These samples were limited in quality, meaning an exact match would be difficult to establish. But investigators tested them against every man with a known connection to Jessica. Her 2 young boys, Vonda's husband Roger Smith, Vonda's son William Smith, Gary Eli, his father J.D. Eli, J.D.'s friend Dudley Hudson. Every single one of those men was excluded as a source of the DNA found under Jessica's fingernails. She had fought someone. She had clawed at them hard enough to collect their genetic material. And that person was not in the known universe of suspects the investigation had assembled. There was also an unknown male DNA profile found on Jessica's discarded driver's license. And where a female DNA profile was identified on the discarded items found along the roadside, testing against Vonda Smith excluded her as that source too. Fingerprints lifted from the car were similarly ambiguous. A print on the visor matched Vonda, but it was her car. That was not evidence of anything beyond ownership. And then there was the matter of what was found on Jessica's body that no one seemed to want to talk about directly. Sperm was recovered from her underwear from at least 2 individuals. An additional swab from the same area contained 2 male DNA profiles. One of those profiles matched Gary Eli, the fiancé. Because Gary and his father J.D. are father and son, the sample also matched J.D. by extension. The second male profile remained unidentified. There had been a second man, and yet the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation did not conduct a paternity test to determine the father of Jessica's 3rd pregnancy. Gary assumed the child was his. Others around him assumed the same. But Tammy Morrison testified at Vonda's trial that Gary and Jessica had broken up for a period of 2 months in March of that year, 4 to 5 months before Jessica's death. That gap in the timeline, that unidentified second DNA profile, that untested paternity, none of it was ever formally pursued. The blood spatter expert brought in by the prosecution established 2 things about the stains in Vonda's car. First, the car was used only to transport Jessica. It was not the location where she was killed. Second, the blood had not been planted after the fact. The placement of the stains was consistent with a figure of Jessica's size seated in the passenger seat. This, the expert said, would have been almost impossible to fake or recreate artificially. The blood had also been mixed with cleaning products, primarily bleach. Someone had tried to clean the car after Jessica had been inside it. Whether Vonda had delivered the blows or not, the prosecution argued she had almost certainly been the one who cleaned the car. And that cleaning could not have taken place earlier in the week as she claimed, because if it had, the blood would not have been visible to investigators the night they inspected the vehicle. Here was the problem. The defense could not fully escape. The blood was real. The cleaning was real. The attempted concealment was real. The question was not whether Vonda's car had carried Jessica Morrison after she was beaten. The blood answered that. The question was whether Vonda had been the one holding the weapon or whether she had been the one cleaning up after someone who was. That distinction never became the center of the trial, the way Vonda's team believed it should have. The possibility of an accomplice was never formally raised in the courtroom. The murder weapon was never found. The exact location where Jessica was killed was never determined. And Vonda Smith did not take the stand in her own defense. On May 25th, 2018, a Greene County criminal court jury found Vonda Starr Smith guilty. 1 count of first-degree murder for the death of Jessica Morrison. 1 count of second-degree murder for the death of her unborn child. Judge John F. Duggar Jr. sentenced Vonda to a life prison term. She would be considered for parole after serving 51 years. The mathematics of that made it, in practice, an effective life sentence. She was also handed an additional 25 years for the second-degree murder charge, though the sentences were to be served concurrently. Vonda Smith was going to die in prison. The case did not end with the verdict. While Vonda prepared to appeal her conviction, it caught the attention of criminal defense attorney and television personality Ron Kuby. Kuby had built a reputation on cases of questionable convictions, on finding the fractures in seemingly settled verdicts and pulling on them until something gave way. His investigation into the Vonda Smith case raised questions that the trial had left unanswered and suggested something that had not been formally articulated during the proceedings, that Vonda may have been covering for someone else, Vonda's appeal pointed to the DNA recovered from beneath Jessica's fingernails and to the various unidentified fingerprints found throughout the physical evidence. Her legal team argued that the evidence established, at most, that her car was used to transport Jessica's body. It did not establish that she had delivered the blows. The prosecution had presented no evidence that Vonda bore any injury at all, despite Jessica's own wounds showing she had fought violently for her life against whoever killed her. Vonda also argued through her team that the evidence showed she had loved Jessica like a daughter, that she had supported her financially, that she had been present for her boys in a way few extended family members ever are, that she had no real motive to kill her.
How much money would you give her at the time?
Let's just say 1,000.
Was there?
I paid to have her lights turned on. They cut her lights off one day. I had to go get off from work, go get the boys. They turned her lights off.
How long would that be going on?
It's all the time.
She ran through quite a bit.
And it wasn't that I cared, but I couldn't let those two boys or her do without.
Man, you're right.
I give her the money, and then she went to pay bills. I know she said she was going to pay her car. And she said her rent, and then the phone minutes.
So how did she leave?
In my car. And that was the last time I physically saw Jessica.
There is no performance in this, no rehearsed grief. Just a woman accounting for the ordinary texture of her relationship with a young mother who needed more than she had. The lights, the boys, the bills. The constant, unglamorous labor of caring for someone who is not managing on their own. I couldn't let those two boys or her do without. That is not the language of a person engineering a reason to kill. That is the language of someone who had built their identity around being needed. And perhaps that, more than anything, is what made the loss of access to those boys feel so unbearable to Vonda, if the prosecution's theory held any truth at all. Vonda's appeal was denied. But in conversations with Ron Kuby and his team that followed, something shifted in what Vonda was willing to say. She revised her account of the white van. She had said at trial that the man she saw returning her car that evening, getting out of her Sunfire and into the waiting white van, was Gary Eli. After the appeal was denied, she acknowledged she had been wrong about that. Gary, it turned out, had a credible alibi. He had been at work until at least 7 p.m. on the evening of the 12th. She had accepted that, and then, in what Ron Kuby's team described as a bombshell accusation delivered too late to be introduced at trial, Vonda said the man she saw at the end of her driveway that evening, the man who had returned her car, the man who had gotten into the white van and driven away, was her own son, William Smith, the father of Jessica's eldest child. The name had been there the whole time, folded into the edges of the case in ways that, in retrospect, feel almost deliberate. William Smith. A brief relationship with Jessica years earlier, a shared child, a man who Vonda's own defense had confirmed owned or had access to vehicles, a man whose DNA had been tested against the samples found under Jessica's fingernails and excluded, a man whose mother had kept his name out of her account of the evening until after her appeal had been denied and she had nothing left to lose by saying it. Vonda's husband Roger and son William both, according to those close to the family, expressed confusion at her more recent claims. That word. Confused. Not furious, not devastated, not immediately calling police to correct the record. Confused.
That she just a good person. Nobody is her.
There are sentences that arrive without polish and land harder than anything carefully constructed. This is one of them. The grammar incomplete. The thought already breaking apart before it finishes. That she just a good person and we lose her. Present tense folded into past tense. The way grief actually works. The way a person who loves someone still reaches for them in the middle of a sentence. Vonda's supporters, Aunt Peggy and Grandma Sharon among them, have maintained consistently and without apparent wavering that she did not do this. Multiple character witnesses at trial spoke to her calm temperament, her generosity, her devotion to family. In the years since, there has been a book published by local residents and numerous blogs and community forums arguing passionately for her innocence, building cases from the same evidence presented at trial and pointing at the same gaps the defense raised and the prosecution left open. What remains? Jessica Morrison walked into a grocery store at 3:07 in the afternoon on August 12, 2016, with her two boys beside her, and she was captured on surveillance footage doing the ordinary things that people do when they are alive and not yet afraid. She picked out food, she paid, she walked out into the summer air, By 7:30 that evening, she was lying next to 2 trees near a barbed wire fence on a quiet loop in rural Tennessee. No one has ever been convicted of being in the same space as her when the blows were delivered. The weapon has never been found. The location of the killing has never been confirmed. 3 male DNA profiles recovered from beneath her fingernails have never been matched to anyone. A second male profile and biological evidence recovered from her body has never been identified. A paternity test for her unborn child was never conducted. A white van seen by 2 independent witnesses at her home around the time of her death was never traced with certainty to a single owner. J.D. Eli is currently serving time in a federal prison on drug charges. Tammy Morrison has had her own encounters with law enforcement since Jessica's death. Vonda Smith is serving what is functionally a life sentence in a Tennessee prison. The jury found the blood in the car to be conclusive enough. And maybe it was. A blood spatter expert testified it could not have been planted. Someone tried to clean it. Someone put Jessica Morrison, bleeding and possibly still alive, into the passenger seat of that white Pontiac Sunfire and drove. Someone scattered her belongings across miles of rural road. Someone left her body near a barbed wire fence and walked away. Whether that person was Vonda Smith alone, whether Vonda was present and covering for someone else, whether Vonda cleaned up after an act she did not commit in order to protect a member of her own family, whether the name she finally spoke, too late, and in private, after every legal avenue had closed, was the truth she had been carrying since 2 a.m. on August 13th when 2 detectives knocked on her door and she said, before anything else, I did not see her. These questions do not have answers that the legal record provides. Channing Smith, Jessica's eldest boy, the child Vonda had fought so hard to remain close to. The child whose canceled weekend visit may or may not have been the trigger for everything that followed, was 3 years old when his mother was killed. He is 11 now. He did not get to keep either of the women who loved him most. That is what this case actually produced. Not justice, clean and resolved. Not a story that closes neatly at the verdict. A child who lost his mother to violence and grew up with his grandmother's conviction hanging over his name. A family fractured along lines that no trial and no sentence fully explains. Jessica Morrison fought for her life. The evidence of that is written on her hands. Whatever happened in the hours between 3:43 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. on August 12th, 2016, she did not accept it quietly. She reached out, she clawed, she left DNA under her fingernails that has never been matched to anyone. She was trying to tell us something, and the case has not finished listening yet.
Totally cooperating, just relax. Not doing anything, but I'll cooperate. Sir, I will be very cooperative. Let's try that, please.
She's missing right now. Yes, Dan, where is Edna? I don't have a clue. If you tell them to turn that off, I'll talk to you a little more freely.
There is a moment caught on surveillance that looks like nothing. A parking lot, a grocery store, a woman in a car, waiting. She is doing what she has done countless times. She is picking someone up. A man walks out of the Food Lion carrying 2 bags. He moves with the casual ease of someone who belongs there. He opens the passenger door. He sits beside her. She drives them both away. That is the last time Edna Suttles is seen making her own choices. Her car is abandoned in a hotel parking lot 6 days later. Its seats wiped clean of every fingerprint that was ever pressed into them. You already know someone who trusts the wrong person. You have already told them, in passing, that you will be fine, that the handyman is reliable, that the neighbor seems kind, that the man who helps around the house has never given you a reason to worry. That is what Edna thought too. This is the story of what happens next. South Carolina is the kind of town that earns its name. It sits at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, quiet, deliberate, the sort of place where people recognize faces in parking lots and hold doors open without being asked. It is the kind of community where an 80-year-old woman who works as a private caregiver is woven into the fabric of daily life. Not celebrated, not visible. Simply there, reliably, the way a load-bearing wall is there unnoticed until it is gone. Edna Suttles was a sitter. That word carries more weight than it appears to. She showed up. She took care of people whose bodies had begun to betray them. She sat with mothers and fathers in the hours when their families could not be there, when the nights were long and the fear was quiet and unspoken. She did this work without ceremony. On the morning of August 27th, she left her home on time, the way she always did. She had a job to go to. Someone was counting on her. She never arrived. The first call came in to Greenville County 911 that afternoon. A family was waiting. The sitter who was supposed to be there had not shown up.
Greenville County 911, what's your emergency? A sitter was supposed to show up to be with my mom today. Her name is Edna Suttles. and she didn't show up. This is not like her. She shows up like clockwork. So something's wrong.
That call was only the beginning of what would become one of the longest and darkest unravelings in Greenville County history. A case that would stretch back 24 years, reach across 3 states, and eventually pull 4 separate deaths into the orbit of a single man who had learned, over decades, exactly how to make himself useful. Officers arrived at Edna's home for a welfare check. No response. No signs of forced entry. No Edna. But when her son was reached, he flagged 2 things immediately. $50,000 worth of jewelry was missing, and her car was gone. If they could find the car, they might find her. That was the operating logic. Simple, urgent, correct. The hunt for Edna's vehicle began that same evening. 6 days later, they found it, abandoned in the parking lot of a hotel in Travelers Rest. Close enough to her home that walking distance would have been possible, but she had not walked anywhere. No one at the hotel had checked in under her name. No one at the desk remembered her. The car was simply there, waiting, like it had been left by someone who intended never to come back for it. To understand what happened to that car and to Edna, detectives made a decision that would crack the case open. They went back to the cameras. Starting at 9 a.m. on August 27th, they began building a minute-by-minute account of Edna's last known movements. A camera at a nearby pawn shop captures her leaving her home. She is driving toward Food Lion. 9 minutes later, she arrives. A man walks out of the store. He has 2 bags in his hands. He sits beside her in the passenger seat. She drives them both back toward her home. 4 hours pass. At 1:43 in the afternoon, Edna's car leaves her home again. It returns to the same Food Lion parking lot. But the person behind the wheel is not Edna. It is the man. He parks her car. He walks to a separate vehicle, his own, and pulls it alongside hers. And then, in footage that investigators would later describe as requiring frame-by-frame analysis to fully comprehend, he reaches into Edna's car and drags something out of it. Initially, they could not tell what had been moved. Then they looked closer. It was not a what, it was a who. The unmistakable color of Edna Suttles' golden hair, limp, motionless, transferred from one vehicle to another in a parking lot where anyone could have seen, and no one did. 4 minutes later, at 1:47 p.m., the man drives Edna's car into the hotel parking lot. He parks it in the exact spot where detectives would eventually find it. He gets out. He begins wiping down the doors, the seats, every surface that might carry the impression of a hand. He moves efficiently. He has done this before, or at least he has thought about doing it before, which is perhaps more disturbing. By 2:14 p.m., he is gone. The parking lot is quiet. The car sits. Now, detectives had footage. What they did not yet have was a name. The man stayed far from most cameras. The resolution was not generous. He moved like someone who understood angles, where to stand, where not to stand, when to turn away. The investigation was at risk of stalling before it had truly begun. Then someone had an idea. He had carried bags out of Food Lion, which meant he had purchased something, which meant there was internal store footage and possibly a transaction record and possibly a face caught at a register in better light than any parking lot camera had offered. Officers pulled the footage. They got their face, and when they ran it, what came back stopped the room. The man's name was Daniel Prince, 24 years before Edna disappeared. In 1997, Daniel Prince had abducted a woman in Michigan. He had bound her, shackled her hands. She escaped by sheer luck, freed herself, got out, survived. He was convicted of kidnapping. He was sentenced to a maximum of 30 years. He served 13 and a half. By 2009, Daniel Prince was out on parole. He began working as a handyman. His clients were predominantly elderly women living alone. Let that sit for a moment. A man convicted of kidnapping an elderly woman, released early, immediately begins building a client base of elderly women living alone. Not a coincidence, a methodology. For detectives, the picture that assembled itself was not merely disturbing. It was a pattern, a deliberate, patient, practiced pattern that had been operating in plain sight for over a decade. They had a kidnapper, he was loose, and somewhere out there, Edna might still be alive. They had to move. The evidence was not yet strong enough to charge Prince with kidnapping or murder. What they had was enough to establish probable cause for grand larceny Edna's Jeep. That was sufficient for a warrant, sufficient to bring him in, sufficient to begin. Officers were dispatched to Daniel Prince's residence. The moment the arrest team reached him, Prince was already performing. Not panicking, not fleeing, performing. He understood that the first seconds of an interaction with police set a tone, and he was determined to set it himself.
totally cooperating, just with my not doing anything, but I'm cooperating. Sir, I will be very cooperative. Let's try that, please.
A man who had spent 13 and a half years in federal custody knew exactly what cooperative looked like. He wore it like a coat he had owned for years, comfortable, practiced, slightly too deliberate to be instinctive. The detectives watching him in those first moments saw someone who was not afraid. That told them something important. When Daniel Prince was brought into the interrogation room, the detectives made a choice. They did not lead with the footage. They did not reveal what they knew about the parking lot, the car, the wiped-down seats, the body being moved from one vehicle to another in broad daylight. They talked about his work, his clients, his life since prison. They were warm, unhurried, two people sharing a conversation. This was not naivety. This was architecture. Every word Prince spoke before they showed him what they had was a wall he was building around himself, and eventually, the walls would close in. Prince had an answer for everything. He was polished in the way of someone who had rehearsed not the specific conversation, but the general shape of it, the question of who he was now versus who he had been.
I do a lot of home remodeling, home repairs. I lay a lot of tile, and I got a customer base that has me doing stuff.
Okay, so why Boston, North Carolina, come all the way down from, say, Michigan or Wisconsin?
Okay, here, this is real easy. I'm originally from the east side of the state of Michigan, but I was in prison in Michigan for a while, and when I paroled to the west side of the state.
Okay. What did you get locked up for? Because you said you got paroled.
I was locked up for a kidnapping charge.
Okay.
And I did 13 and a half years for that.
Oh, wow.
I did 1.5 years for a false statement on a vehicle title. You know, when they're not sure if they're going to make something, they want something to hold you with. So the false statement, that's all that was. The kidnapping, I was doing some bad shit that I shouldn't have been doing, but I shouldn't have gotten kidnapping, but I was doing some bad shit.
What kind of shit? What shit have you gotten?
I really don't want to say.
We're just bullshitting.
No,
we're just bullshitting.
Nothing when you're talking to two police detectives in a room. It's just bullshit. Okay, I've been through the system enough to know that. Yeah. All I'm going to say about that is I did my time. I made my first parole, and I haven't been in trouble since.
He volunteered the prior kidnapping charge himself. That was calculated. It was better, he understood, to name it before they named it. Better to frame it on his own terms, a mistake paid for behind him. He wanted them to see a reformed man, a working man, a man who had earned his way back. What he did not know was that they had already seen the parking lot footage, that the reformed man narrative had already been destroyed before he walked into this room. When detectives finally turned the conversation toward the specific date, August 27th, Prince's answers began to develop a texture. Vague, mobile, designed to acknowledge presence in Traveler's Rest without pinning him to a moment he could not later escape.
I've been going all over the place. I've been back and forth to Charlotte. I've been down to South Carolina.
Like, where's your jobs in South Carolina taking you?
Actually, I was down to Traveler's Rest, but I don't know if it was Friday or Thursday. I know I'd been there earlier that week.
But you don't remember which day specifically?
No, it was either Thursday or Friday.
What kind of job were you working on?
I wasn't.
You wasn't?
I wasn't. This lady had talked to me several times. I'd been down to her house 2 or 3 times. We kind of got to be friends.
He was constructing a friendship, a long, warm, mutual friendship between himself and an 80-year-old woman who trusted him, called on him, let him into her home. He was building the narrative of a man who cared for her. Every word was a stone placed carefully on the edge of a cliff. The detectives were watching where he put his feet. When they asked him what he had been doing with Edna that day, Prince deployed his most elaborate construction yet. A private investigator, a meeting at a hotel, a nervous woman who didn't feel safe going alone, a friend with military background stepping in to protect her.
She wanted me to look at some stuff at her house.
Okay.
And she picked me up at Food Lane because she wanted me with her when she was gonna go meet some guy for private investigator.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about that.
She wanted me to meet her down there.
Okay.
She was nervous because she says, I'm not sure I trust this guy. And she knows I've been in the military. And she says, will you meet me? She wanted me to see if this guy was going to meet her where he was supposed to meet her.
Do you know where?
There was a hotel lobby that he had finally said, meet me at the hotel.
Okay.
She says, drive up there and see if he's there. And I drove up there.
This is a specific kind of lie, not a desperate, improvised lie, a constructed one. It had a character, the suspicious private investigator. It had a location, the hotel. It had a motive, Edna's fear, Edna's need for protection. It pointed suspicion at a third party and cast Prince as a protector rather than a predator. The problem was that detectives had already spoken to the private investigator. He had not met with Edna that day. He had not been at any hotel. The story had no second wall to hold it up. The cameras had caught everything. The parking lot, the car, the wiping down of every surface. And Prince, alone, walking back to his own vehicle. No Edna stepping out behind him. No Edna sitting in the passenger seat. Just Prince, his task completed, driving away. When the detective walked him through it, frame by frame, Prince began to fracture at the edges.
Nobody else gets out.
I told you that.
You're walking around the car.
Yeah.
You wiped the entire car down.
Because I was worried.
You were worried. There's you walking across the parking lot in front of Little Caesars.
Mm-hmm.
And there's you getting back into your car and driving away.
Oh, she's with me.
Look, man, you are a good dude. I honestly do believe that you screwed up years and years ago.
She's with me. 3 words that the footage made impossible. 3 words that collapsed under the weight of every second of recording that detectives had built their case on. She was not with him. She had not been walking. She had not been in the passenger seat or waiting inside the hotel or meeting anyone. She was gone, and he was the last person to have her, and he knew it, and he said, she's with me anyway, because that was the only card left in his hand. The detective's response was not anger. It was something quieter and more devastating. He told Prince he was a good dude, that he believed Prince had made a mistake years ago and had been trying to live past it, that gentleness was the trap closing. There was mud on Prince's car, not the kind that comes from an unpaved driveway or a wet parking lot, the kind that comes from driving somewhere, deliberate somewhere, off the mapped road, somewhere that does not have a name on any sign. When detectives raised it, Prince had an answer waiting.
I never went. Where did you leave? Oh, I can tell you exactly where she and I had gone off road, please. When we were going from 25 south, there was, off to the right, there was a truck with a trailer and another vehicle there that had a for sale sign on it. And it looked like an older truck. And I needed a work truck. And I went ahead and I pulled in and with her, and then we pulled out. And it was right there on 25.
A truck with a trailer, a for sale sign. An old work truck he had been thinking about buying, so he pulled in, dirt road and all, just to take a look. The explanation was so ordinary, it was almost beautiful. Untraceable, unverifiable. A roadside detour on a rural highway that left no record and involved no other witness. A story built to explain physical evidence without implicating anyone. But the mud on those wheels did not come from the edge of Highway 25. And detectives knew the direction the car had traveled that afternoon, and the timeline, and the minutes that were unaccounted for. And none of it pointed toward a for sale sign. It pointed toward a grave. This was the longest stretch of the interrogation, the sustained pressure of 2 detectives who had watched every minute of footage, who knew the geography of that day better than Prince had counted on, who refused to let him move the ground beneath his story. He had told them he dropped Edna off at her home, safe. Well, at the end of an ordinary day, the footage said otherwise. The footage showed her car at the hotel. It showed Prince alone. It showed no second vehicle arriving at Edna's address. It showed the clock running out on every version of events he tried to construct.
I don't have a clue. I dropped her off at her house.
Dan, please listen. You did not drop her off at her house. We have followed that car the entire day up and down 25. There's a number of minutes that are unaccounted for that are not by her house.
Which car? Mine or hers?
Dan, stop playing games. You know what we're
When I
talking
got,
about.
okay, I can help you here. Okay. You gotta give me a second. You gotta let me answer the questions when they're asked. When I dropped her vehicle off looking for the guy, she said she wanted me to take her and drive around in my vehicle. So I left her vehicle. I went down to Food Lion and she was in my vehicle with me. And I dropped her off at home.
Dan, we watched the video. She is not
The car sits there.
It sits there, man.
No, not in her car.
Never.
My car.
We watched you go back to
in
Food
my car.
Line. You did not drop anyone off, man.
I picked her back up. She sat in my car at Food Line, and I went back and got her.
No, you did not.
Listen to what happens in that exchange. The story shifts. First, he dropped her at home in her car. Then she was in his car. Then he went back to Food Lion and picked her back up. Each new version is not an elaboration of the last. It is a replacement. A man rewriting his own testimony in real time, searching for a version that might survive contact with what was on those tapes. He could not find one, because there was not one to find. He had an answer for the wiping too. It was, he said, a kindness.
The only thing I did was because I knew I'd been in and out of her car all the time with her. I'm like, there is no way in hell I'm going to just leave this thing here because she's got somebody that's after her.
Someone was after Edna. That was his explanation. He wiped down every surface in her car, not because he had just transferred an unconscious 80-year-old woman from the back seat into his trunk, but because he was protecting her from this unnamed, unverifiable threat. He was still trying to point the suspicion somewhere else. Somewhere out there was a private investigator who never showed up, a mysterious pursuer who never materialized, a truck on a highway that no one else remembered. Prince's story was populated entirely with people who could not be found because they did not exist. The detectives had what they needed. Now they needed the body. While Prince was in custody on the firearms charge, because when officers searched his property, they found several automatic weapons, which a man with his prior convictions was federally prohibited from owning. They kept searching. And they found something in a yogurt cup. It was the yogurt he had purchased at Food Lion that morning. The yogurt he had carried out in one of those 2 bags as he walked toward Edna's waiting car. The yogurt that investigators would later determine was laced with a deliberate cocktail of 3 substances: lorazepam, tramadol, and cyclobenzaprine. These 3 drugs, combined, cause central nervous system depression. The body's neurological functions slow, consciousness dims, the ability to resist, to call out, to run, to fight, it dissolves. In the footage, Edna had been alert when she picked Prince up at 9:23 in the morning. By 1:43 p.m., when her car returned to the Food Lion parking lot and he climbed out of the driver's seat, she was not walking, she was not speaking, she was being moved. She had been sedated. He had planned this, not as an improvised response to opportunity, as a deliberate, premeditated act. He had purchased the yogurt. He had laced it. He had carried it out to her car. He had waited for the drugs to take effect. He had 4 hours to wait between 9 in the morning and 1:43 in the afternoon. And those 4 hours passed inside Edna's home, which she would never return to. There was nothing she could do. There is nothing more clarifying than that sentence, and nothing more devastating. She had done everything right. She had known him for years. She had opened her door to someone she trusted. She had taken the yogurt from his hands. There was nothing she could do. Prince was brought back in for a second round of questioning. By now, the forensic picture was building. The drugs, the footage, the firearms charge, providing a legal anchor while investigators worked the broader case. Prince was cornered, not theatrically, not suddenly, but in the slow, incremental way that good detective work accomplishes, brick by brick, until a wall has been built around someone and they look up and realize there is no longer a door. His composure, so studied during the initial interrogation, had begun to cost him something to maintain. The detectives could see it. They pressed. From the very beginning, Edna's disappearance was no longer just something that happened in a parking lot, but something that the whole world could witness. The chain of events it set in motion would eventually reach Daniel Prince, and it would not stop until it had pulled 4 deaths into the light. What the search of Prince's property ultimately revealed was not just the evidence of Edna's murder. It was the architecture of a much longer pattern. When Prince sat back down across from investigators and decided to deal, he admitted to 3 additional murders. The first victim was Dolores Sellers. Prince had euthanized Dolores at the request of her own daughter, Nancy Rago. Dolores had been suffering. Nancy had wanted it to end. She had asked Prince to end it, and he had. That is where the story might have stopped, if Nancy had not made a decision. Nancy Rago began to feel the weight of what she had done. The guilt accumulated. She began to consider going to the police. She had become a liability, and Daniel Prince was not someone who left liabilities unresolved. Nancy Rago became his second victim. After her death, Prince had continued to receive Nancy's Social Security checks. She had given him power of attorney, and he used it to collect her payments month after month, year after year, as though she were simply living quietly somewhere, no longer reachable. And to prevent her family from asking too many questions, Prince had done something that reveals the particular coldness at the center of what he was. From 2017 onward, he sent Nancy's family emails and messages impersonating her. He inhabited her voice in text, made her digitally present, kept her family from looking for a body because they believed she was still alive. For years, a dead woman's family received messages from someone pretending to be her, and they wrote back, and the replies came. And they believed his third victim was a man named Lee Goodman, who Prince claimed had attempted to rob him. The specifics remain murky by Prince's own telling, but the outcome does not. Lee Goodman was dead, his body disposed of in a remote location, the same methodology Prince had applied every time. Choose a desolate place. Leave no trail back to yourself. Let time and geography do the rest. 3 deaths before Edna, spread across years, spanning multiple states, and Daniel Prince had continued to work as a handyman for elderly women living alone, building his client base, making himself useful, arriving at front doors with a friendly face and a work ethic that made people feel safe. The cameras were still running when Prince made his offer. He wanted the cameras off. He said he would talk more freely without them. He sat across from the detectives and waited for the recording to end. What he did not know, what the investigators had ensured without telling him, was that the audio kept running. Everything he said in that room went onto tape.
Okay, let's put it this way. A person I was very good friends with wanted to do something to put someone basically out of their misery that was very closely related to them. That's one body. That person started having an extreme amount of guilt over this and decided they were going to go tell what had happened. That's the second body. There's a third body that I did not kill, and I knew that they'd be getting Social Security disability for the rest of their life. So I got rid of said bodies, for example, so that I could continue to use the card.
By any chance, while he's getting all this squared away, can you just help me get that closure for Edna's family?
Not until I have this. I clam up like a clam if this doesn't go federal for everything.
Listen to what he does with language in that confession. He does not say killed. He does not say murdered. He says got rid of. He treats the bodies as a logistical category, things that needed managing, obstacles that needed clearing. The first death he frames as an act of compassion. The second he frames as self-preservation. The third he frames, almost casually, as a financial arrangement. He got rid of a body so he could keep collecting checks. And then at the end, the negotiation, if this doesn't go federal for everything, I clam up. He was not confessing, he was bargaining. Even in the moment of apparent surrender, Daniel Prince was trying to control the outcome. Better conditions in a federal prison, avoidance of the death penalty, a life sentence instead of an execution. He offered Edna's location in exchange. The detectives took the deal, and they kept the audio. Edna Suttles was found on May 16th, 2022. Nearly 1 full year after she had driven to that Food Lion parking lot on a quiet August morning to pick up a man she trusted. Her body was buried in a grave near Daniel Prince's home in Rutherford County. The body was significantly decomposed, but it was identified, positively, conclusively identified as Edna. She was returned to her family. That sentence is too small for what it contains. A year of not knowing. A year of a family holding the image of a woman with golden hair being transferred between cars in a parking lot, unable to answer the question of where she was, unable to bury her, unable to complete the grief. A year of waiting for a man to tell them where he had put her, which he had agreed to do only in exchange for something he wanted. She was returned to her family. Daniel Prince avoided trial. He made his deal with federal prosecutors, gave up Edna's location, and in exchange, his case was processed at the federal level, granting him access to the better living conditions of federal incarceration. The death penalty was set aside. He received a life sentence. He is alive today. The women he killed are not Dolores Sellers, who suffered, and whose daughter asked for her suffering to end. Nancy Rago, who felt guilt and who died for considering honesty. Lee Goodman, whose name appears briefly at the edge of this story, disposed of like the others, reduced to a logistical problem. And Edna Suttles, who showed up every morning, who drove to that parking lot in good faith, who accepted yogurt from someone she had trusted for years, and who was carried from one car to another in a parking lot in broad daylight while the cameras rolled and the world went on around her. There is a specific grief that attaches to the victims of predators who disguise themselves through usefulness. The handyman who shows up, the neighbor who helps with groceries. The person who offers to sit with you while you wait for someone you're not sure you trust. These people exist in the gap between loneliness and connection, and they exploit the fact that most of the time, kindness is actually kindness. Edna Suttles spent her life in that same gap, but on the other side of it, she showed up for people. She was the person whose absence was noticed because her presence had been load-bearing. She was returned to her family. That is not enough. It is what there is. Somewhere in Traveler's Rest, there is a family that received a phone call on May 16th, 2022, telling them they could finally bury their mother. And somewhere in a federal correctional facility, a man who understood that elderly women living alone were easier to control than anyone who might resist is writing letters and filing requests and negotiating the conditions of a life he has no right to be living. And in the parking lot of a Food Lion in South Carolina, the cameras are still running. They run every day. They record every ordinary moment, every car pulling in, every person carrying bags across the asphalt, every small transaction between one human being and another, every instance of a woman waiting, trusting, believing that the person walking toward her means her no harm. The cameras cannot protect her. They can only remember somewhere in northern British Columbia, a gas station security feed captures two people who have no idea they are being watched, a young woman and her boyfriend. They are not doing anything remarkable. They fill up their van. She cleans the windshield. He leans against the door. Right there, next to pump number, whatever it was, on an ordinary summer evening, they hold each other. No urgency, no fear. Just two people deeply glad to be alive and together and moving. 14 hours later, a trucker driving Highway 97 in the early gray of a July morning. He saw something in the ditch that made him stop. China Deese was 24 years old. Lucas Fowler was 23. They were face down in the dirt, 15 feet apart, cold to the touch, and had been dead for some time. And somewhere ahead of that trucker, on the same road you might drive this summer with your windows down and your whole life in front of you, two killers were already gone. The Alaska Highway cuts through northern British Columbia like a scar. People drive it for the views. In the summer of 2019, a young couple was somewhere on that highway in a 1986 blue Chevrolet minivan, doing exactly what they had dreamed of doing together. Road tripping through Canada, final destination, Alaska. Lucas Fowler was 23 years old. He had grown up in Sydney, Australia, the son of a New South Wales chief inspector. And from a young age, he had understood that the world was large and that sitting still inside it was a kind of waste. He had spent 2 years backpacking, moving through Croatia, through Japan, through Central and South America, through Southeast Asia, accumulating passport stamps the way other people accumulate furniture. He surfed, he camped, he hiked, he swam in open water. He wanted, as his family described it, to see as much of the world as he could, and he was doing exactly that. It was in Croatia in 2017 that he met her. China Deese was 24. She was from North Carolina. She had studied in Europe and worked on a grape farm, saving every dollar she could, and by the time she met Lucas, she had already visited 13 countries. They were, as their families would later say, with the specific, quiet certainty of people who recognize something rare, the perfect match, in sync from the start. Their families loved each other before they had even met. Lucas's father, Stephen, would later say that the day she stole Lucas's heart, she became a part of the family. They spent 2 years managing the 10,000 miles between them, through phone calls that lasted hours, through meticulously planned trips, through the kind of long-distance relationship that only works when both people are genuinely committed to the inconvenience. They spent Christmas together in America with China's family. They talked about the future, the way people talk about something they fully intend to build. When Lucas secured a visa and took work on a ranch in British Columbia, the distance collapsed to something workable. China flew out, and it was there, in the province that would later become the center of everything, that they made the plan. A road trip through Canada, everything they could see, Alaska at the end. Lucas spent weeks doing up the van, fixing it up, making it ready. China flew back to North Carolina, counted down the days, and on the evening of July 13th, 2019, a CCTV camera at a gas station in Fort Nelson, British Columbia, captured the two of them for the last time. They were filling up the tank, cleaning the windows, and before they drove off into the dark, they held each other. Not a perfunctory embrace, a full, deliberate, joyful hold. China's mother, Sheila, would later watch that footage over and over and over again. She kept seeing new things each time. She would describe what she saw in that embrace as two people saying to each other, "Let's do this. Here we go." They drove north, and the following day, somewhere on Highway 97 near the Liard River Hot Springs, the van broke down. A fellow tourist named Charles stopped when he saw them on the shoulder. Lucas was cheerful, unbothered. He told Charles they would keep working on it, and if they couldn't fix it by morning, they would call a tow truck when they got phone service. Charles told them he was camping about 3 miles away and would come back in the morning to check on them. He left them sitting on the side of the road, eating food, smiling, happily embracing a situation that would have sent most people into a spiral. At 11:30, the Easy Road, a maintenance worker, drove past the same stretch of Highway 97. What she saw made her slow down without stopping. A man with a beard was standing by the van, talking to China and Lucas. She described him as seeming frustrated. The conversation looked heated. Both right side doors of the van were open. The man appeared to have come from a gray car parked nearby. She had a bad feeling. She drove on. She later said, "If you just get a bad feeling, that's what I had. You just don't stop." She drove on, a trucker driving Highway 97 in the early gray of a July morning. He saw something in the ditch that made him stop. As he pulled closer, he understood what he was looking at. China Deese and Lucas Fowler were face down in a ditch, 10 feet from their van, 15 feet from each other, cold to the touch, dead for some time. The trucker called for help and spent the next hour redirecting traffic, stopping cars from driving through, doing whatever a person does when they have driven into something their brain cannot immediately process. When police arrived at 7 in the morning, he was still there, still directing cars, clearly distraught. 5 spent shell casings were found nearby. China's phone was on the ground. Lucas's phone was not found. The van's back window had been smashed. The back doors were open. The medical examiner confirmed entry and exit wounds on both bodies. Charles, the tourist who had promised to come back, arrived just after 9 in the morning, kept to his word, and was met with police blocks in the road. He simply couldn't believe it had happened. News of the murders spread fast. The story had everything the media gravitates toward. A young couple on a road trip, an idyllic setting, turned brutal, no obvious motive, no suspect in custody, a killer somewhere on the highway. Lucas's father, Stephen, a serving police officer in Australia, flew to Canada. Australian police, in an act of solidarity that spoke to how the loss had landed within their ranks, offered their support to the Canadian authorities and sent 2 officers to assist in liaising with the family. The RCMP released a composite sketch based on the road maintenance worker's description of the bearded man she had seen talking to the couple. They asked anyone with dashcam footage from Highway 97 to come forward. The investigation was in its infancy. The primary question was whether Lucas and China had been targeted or whether this was a crime of opportunity. There was no evidence pointing to any connection with other active cases in the area. Police were careful to say there was no heightened risk to public safety. Stephen Fowler stood before cameras and told the world what he needed to say as both a police officer and a father. 2 different men trying to speak through the same body.
As you know, I may be an experienced police officer, but today I'm standing here as the father of a murder victim. We are just distraught. This has really torn 2 families apart. Our son Lucas was having the time of his life travelling the world. He met a beautiful young lady and they teamed up. They were a great pair and they fell in love. Hopeful of a positive outcome, and obviously we're appealing along with the RMCP for anyone to contact who may have any information whatsoever. I know there's been a lot of speculation, but look, as an experienced police officer, I know how these investigations go. My family and I are more than satisfied with the resources of the RMCP that they're putting into this, and I can tell you I am more than confident in the commitment of all the officers who are working on this case.
There is a particular kind of grief that belongs only to people who have spent their careers delivering that grief to other families. Stephen Fowler knew every word of what he was saying. He had said versions of it before. It had never been his son. Now the investigation would continue, and the highway would offer up its next secret in 5 days. 300 miles north of where Lucas and China were found, a burnt-out camper van was discovered near Dease Lake in British Columbia. The number plate had survived the fire well enough to run through the database. It came back registered to a 19-year-old named Cam McLeod, who had left Vancouver Island on July 12th with his best friend, 18-year-old Briar Schmegelski. Both had recently quit their jobs at a Walmart. They had decided, on the spur of the moment, according to their families, to drive up to the Yukon for work. The last confirmed sighting of them before the van was found had been a coffee stop at a place called Jade City. The owner remembered them. Nothing unusual, no signs of distress. Now they were missing, and their van was ash. A mile from the burned van, police found something else, the body of a man who had also been shot. He had no identification on him. Police released a sketch. He appeared to be in his 50s or 60s. He had a large gray beard. Was it possible that the two missing teenagers and the two murdered travelers were connected?
At this point, we have nothing to indicate that their deaths are linked to any other active and ongoing investigations in that area of the province, or that there's a heightened risk to public safety because of this. This is a unique circumstance in northern British Columbia. There's no indication that there's been a spike in any crimes. And that this is something that we appreciate the fact that these rumors are going out there, but at this point there's nothing to indicate that these rumors are true.
Publicly, the RCMP held the line. Privately, the needle was beginning to move. The sketch of the unidentified victim started circulating, and a woman named Helen called in. She thought it looked like her husband, 64-year-old Leonard Dick, who had driven off 9 days earlier for a solo camping trip in his Toyota RAV4. He had been texting her and the children regularly until the evening of July 18th. Then nothing. Leonard was a botany lecturer at the University of British Columbia. His students described him as fascinating and passionate, a man who made them want to learn more. He drew, he wrote short plays and poems. He played guitar. He loved the great outdoors with the specific devotion of someone who was also quiet and private, who needed the land the way other people need, a room with the door closed. He had just turned 64. He had packed a small camping stove, some food, a tent, and driven off in his RAV4 to find grizzlies to photograph and teach himself about the wildlife. DNA testing would confirm what Helen already feared. Leonard Dick was the third victim. On July 21st, everything changed. Security footage from Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan came in. Cameras had caught a gray 2011 Toyota RAV4. Inside the car were Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski, the two missing teenagers. In subsequent footage, the pair were filmed buying black tape, which they pressed over sections of the car in what appeared to be an attempt to disguise it. It didn't work. The car was obviously Leonard's. Inside the burned-out camper van, officers had by now completed a proper forensic search. They found rounds of ammunition that matched what had been recovered at both crime scenes. The RCMP called a press conference. What they announced had not been anticipated by anyone who had spent the previous week hoping for the teenagers to be found safe.
Today, I'm here to request public assistance in locating suspects in connection to the Northern British Columbia investigations. Cam and Briar are no longer considered missing. The RCMP are now considering Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski as suspects in the Dees Lake suspicious death and the double homicide of Lucas Fowler and China Dees. We're asking for the public, if you spot Briar or Cam, consider them dangerous. Do not approach, take no action, and call immediately 911.
The two teenagers that an entire country had been searching for, praying to find unharmed, were the suspected killers of China, Lucas and Leonard. Before leaving Vancouver Island, Cam had used his legally held possession and acquisition license to purchase an SKS semi-automatic rifle and 20 rounds of ammunition. The manhunt was now international news. Alan Schmigelski, Briar's father, heard the announcement the same way everyone else did, through the media. His son, whom he had been publicly pleading for, whose face had appeared on missing persons notices, was now wanted for murder. He had already been carrying something heavy. The last time he had spoken to Briar properly had been before the trip. His marriage to Briar's mother had ended in divorce, and Alan knew that this had affected his son deeply. Briar had retreated inward over the years. He had found solace in YouTube and video games. He seldom talked about what was inside him. Friends later said he had become obsessed with Hitler and the Third Reich, had purchased memorabilia, had a fascination with guns from an early age. When playing shooting games, he would ask his friends, "What if this was real? Can you imagine if this was real?" He would get very excited about that idea. His friends found it odd. They never matched his energy when he said it. Cam's family described him as quiet, polite, kind. Nothing about the person they knew was visible in what was now unfolding. Alan spoke publicly. His words came out jagged and unpolished, the grammar of a man trying to hold himself together and failing. My heart just sank. I told myself, there's a mistake. There's got to be a mistake. He knew there was no mistake. The footage was real. The ammunition matched. His son was out there somewhere in the Canadian wilderness, armed, and wanted for 3 murders. What came after that was not the language of denial. It was something else entirely. Just before the RCMP press conference announcing the pair as suspects, Cam and Briar had actually been stopped. Not by federal officers, not by the emergency response units that would later flood into the search zone, by First Nation safety officers conducting a routine alcohol check in Split Lake, Manitoba. No alcohol was found. They were waved through. The safety officers had no idea what was about to be announced. By the skin of their teeth, 2 teenagers wanted for 3 murders drove away from a checkpoint and disappeared back into Canada. Where they went next, no one could say with certainty. A day later, on July 23rd, a local man named Billy Beardy and his wife Tamara located the gray Toyota near Fox Lake Cree Nation, north of a place called Gillam in Manitoba. The vehicle was on fire, burning in the woods. Next to it were half-eaten pork chops, pots and pans, orange peels, keys, matches, and various tools. The number plates confirmed it was Leonard's car. DNA testing would follow shortly after. The search, which had started nearly 2,000 miles away on a remote British Columbia highway, suddenly collapsed inward onto the small town of Gillam. Fewer than 1,500 people. 1 road in, 1 road out. Police set up their base. The town went on lockdown. Residents were told to keep their doors locked day and night. Only leave if necessary. The mayor said that in the space of a few days, the town went from seeing 2 or 3 police officers over a couple of days to hundreds, patrolling the streets morning, noon, and night. Search parties fanned out into the surrounding wilderness. Drones, helicopters, dogs, crisis negotiators, military support. Over 1,000 tips followed up. Nearly 4,000 square miles searched. More than 500 doors knocked on, including those of both teenagers' parents. Arrest warrants were issued. Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski were now named as official suspects in the deaths of China Deese, Lucas Fowler, and Leonard Dick. The families of both teenagers were begging publicly for their sons to come home, to turn themselves in, to let everyone deal with whatever had happened together. Alan Schmigelski was no longer speaking in the language of disbelief. He had moved into something darker and more certain.
Initially, it looked like they were victims as well, right? Initially. But both of them have to have a lot of pain inside. Both of them. A normal child doesn't travel across the country killing people. A child in some very serious pain does.
He paused, and then he said what he believed was about to happen to his son.
Mounties, we're going to shoot first and ask questions later. Basically, he's going to be dead today or tomorrow.
He was a father. He was watching the clock run out on his child in real time, through a press conference, in front of cameras. There was nothing he could do, nowhere he could go, no version of the phone call he could make that would reach Briar in the woods. He had one thing left to say, and he said it out loud, to no one and to everyone.
Rest in peace, Briar. I love you. I'm so sorry all this had to happen. I'm so sorry that I couldn't rescue you.
The words of a man grieving a son who was still alive when he said them. Just barely. Somewhere in a wilderness that does not forgive the people who enter it without knowing how to survive it. Northern Manitoba in late July is not a place that tolerates error. The bush around Gillam is dense and dark in a way that photographs cannot communicate. Swampy ground that will pull you in before you realize you are sinking. Bears. Insects in numbers that feel punishing. Rivers that move fast enough to take whatever you put in them. Heat in summer that sits heavy and unrelenting. Billy Beardy knew this land. He had grown up near it. He understood it the way people understand things they have never had to articulate because they have simply always known them. When authorities realized the depth of Billy's knowledge of the terrain, they brought him into the search in a way that went well beyond consultation. He was effectively guiding the operation, leading teams, directing boats along the Nelson River, pointing to places that looked unremarkable on a map, but that he understood, from experience, as the places where things end up. His team began going back along the river by boat. On the Nelson, they found Cam's backpack, a box of ammunition inside it, his wallet, some clothes. They found a toiletries bag belonging to Leonard, a sleeping bag. Billy pointed out that the current in the Nelson moves at a pace and with a force that does not deposit items gently on the shore. These things had been left there deliberately, dumped. The pair were still on foot, but they were slowing down, getting rid of weight, getting rid of anything that wasn't absolutely necessary to keep moving. They were exhausted. They were hungry. They were fighting terrain that locals with decades of experience would think twice about entering. And they were still armed. At the end of July, police announced what they called a phased withdrawal of resources. After a week of one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history, the search was being scaled back. Tips had dried up. The leads had gone quiet. The wilderness had absorbed the 2 teenagers and given nothing back. Cam's father released a statement that carried the specific hope of a parent who has not yet let themselves arrive at the conclusion they already know is waiting. We try to wrap our heads around what is happening and hope that Cam will come home to us safely so we can all get to the bottom of this story. 2 more tips came in just as resources were being pulled. Members of the Bear Clan Patrol, a First Nations neighborhood watch group, reported seeing 2 tall, slender individuals digging near a landfill in York Landing, almost 80 miles from where the search had been concentrated. They had run into the woods when spotted. Police investigated. They could not substantiate the claim. The search went quiet. The wilderness held on to what it had. Helicopters and drones made another pass over the Nelson River. A small, damaged boat was spotted along the shoreline. Investigators noted it, added it to the map of debris the pair had been leaving as they moved. Billy was still operating the jet boats, still guiding, still reading the land the way he had always read it. On August 7th, 2019, he was out on the river with a team of Royal Canadian Mounted Police on board, making what would be their final pass. The water was moving fast. The banks were heavy with brush. Everything looked the same. Then Billy saw a raven drop into a ravine along the riverside. He knew immediately what it meant. He had always known what it meant. It was not instinct so much as knowledge, the accumulated understanding of someone who grew up in a landscape where everything has a meaning if you know how to read it. Any kind of bushman knows that if there's a raven there, he's eating something. He stopped the boat. He pointed to the area. He told the officers what he believed they would find. On August 7th, 2019, exactly where Billy stopped the boat and identified the raven, authorities found 2 bodies in the dense brush near a creek just off the Nelson River. 19-year-old Cam McLeod and 18-year-old Briar Schmigelski, almost 2,000 miles from where it had all started on the highway. The hunt was over.
This morning, at approximately 10 a.m., our CMP officers located 2 male bodies in the dense brush within 1 kilometer from where the items were found. This is approximately 8 kilometers from where the burnt vehicle was located. At this time, we believe these are the bodies of the 2 suspects wanted in connection with the homicides in British Columbia. To the families of everyone affected by the series of events over the last few weeks, I know it has been so very difficult, and I hope today's announcement can begin to bring some closure.
The medical examiner could not say exactly when the pair had died. What they could determine was that Cam had shot Briar before shooting himself. Police described it as a pact. One of the rifles was found beside Cam's body. The other was still loosely in his grasp. Also found nearby was a digital camera belonging to Leonard Dick. The camera contained 6 videos and 3 still images. One image showed Briar posing with one of the semi-automatic rifles. There was a selfie of Cam, and then the videos. In the first video, both teenagers took full responsibility for all 3 murders. They offered no motive, no explanation, no reason why. In the second video, Briar spoke to the camera and explained they had reached the Nelson River, intending to take a boat and flee. But the current was too strong. He said they might have to kill themselves. Cam agreed. In the third video, they appeared to change course. They talked about taking the boat to Europe or Africa, continuing what they had started, killing more people there. The remaining videos returned to their plan to die. They expressed a wish to be cremated if they were found. Police described the footage as cold, remorseless, and matter-of-fact. The RCMP Behavioral Analysis Unit reviewed the videos and raised specific concerns about a behavior called identification, a recognized warning behavior in threat assessment contexts. The concern was that releasing the footage could inspire others to carry out similar acts of targeted violence. The videos have never been released.
Based on the firearms lab results, crime scene examination, timelines of suspects, and suspect recorded admissions, we believe that no other suspects were responsible for the 3 homicides or were involved in any way. A digital camera belonging to Mr. Dick was also discovered. It contained 6 videos and 3 still images. The RCMP has chosen not to release the videos. Releasing them would not only be disrespectful to the families of the deceased, who are also concerned about the impact of the release, but it could sensationalize the actions of the suspects. The RCMP Behavioral Analysis Unit conducted a review of the videos and was concerned with a behavior called identification, which is considered a warning behavior in the context of threat assessments. The videos may influence or inspire other individuals to carry out a targeted act of violence, essentially creating copycats.
Alan Schmigelski asked to see the tapes. The detective said no. He said he simply could not believe that any of this had happened. Police said the evidence suggested no ringleader, no driving force, no one more responsible than the other. They were, by all available indicators, equal and willing partners in everything they did. Why they did it remains unanswered. The camera recorded their faces and their voices and their complete absence of remorse and gave back nothing that explained the origin of any of it. China's family had known something was wrong before the bodies were found. They had known the moment the phone went quiet. China's mother, Sheila, had been texting her daughter regularly throughout the trip. On the evening of July 13th, the last message came through from Fort Nelson. It said they were heading into an area without Wi-Fi. "Don't worry, Mum. I love you." Sheila went back to the gas station CCTV footage after the investigation closed. She watched it repeatedly. Each viewing gave her something new. The way they held each other at the pump, the small, ordinary intimacy of two people who are exactly where they want to be. She said it was their purpose to travel the world together. What they had seen and done at such a young age was remarkable. The word she chose was not tragic, not stolen, remarkable. Because it was. It remains remarkable, even inside the grief. China's family had spoken earlier, before the investigation closed, when the killer was still unidentified and the fear was still open-ended, and there was nothing to do with the pain except let it move through you.
It doesn't add up, and it's concerning, and we're never going to get full closure on this, and it's going to hurt the rest of our lives.
They were right. There is no closure available when there is no motive, when the why simply does not come. Closure requires a reason, something to place the event inside a frame of understanding, and this case offers none. It ended with 2 dead teenagers in the Manitoba bush, a camera full of cold admissions, and a silence where the explanation should be. The Australian police, who had sent officers to support the family of Lucas Fowler from the beginning, reflected the weight of the loss within their own ranks.
Who was deceased was the son of one of our serving police officers. So clearly, what is a tragic event has been made all the more sadder for us, knowing there's a son of one of our serving police officers. The RCMP, Rocky Mountain Police, an outstanding organisation. We have the utmost confidence in their capacity and capability to run this investigation. But our Commissioner has made a great decision to send over 2 officers to assist in the liaison, purely to assist the family.
The families of China, Lucas, and Leonard each carried the weight differently. Each arrived at something different when trying to hold what had happened. Leonard's wife, Helen, spoke about the boys' families, about guilt, about what she thought the question of responsibility actually looked like when you stripped everything else away. The family should not feel guilt for the way they raised their boys. It has nothing to do with that. It's those boys' decision to take lives, and why they decided to do that isn't important. What's important was that they did it, and I feel they'll face the consequences of that. I think they did at the end. A man who loved the quiet, who went camping alone because the outdoors gave him something the rest of his life couldn't, who had just turned 64 and still wanted to go looking for grizzlies to photograph. He was heading home when he stopped, or when he was stopped. No one will ever know exactly what happened between Leonard Dick and the 2 teenagers on that road near Dease Lake. The camera recorded what came after, not what came before. Billy Beardy spent 13 hours on August 7th going back and forth on the Nelson River by boat, bringing police and forensic experts in and out of the area where the bodies were found. The access was impossible without him. Officers said plainly that they would have been lost without his knowledge of the terrain. His wife later spoke about what those weeks had cost him. He had been out there day after day with no protection, no safety gear, no life jackets. He had been instrumental, and he had been treated in her assessment like something other than a full member of the team. The lead investigator acknowledged this. He apologized. In October 2019, Billy Beardy was elected chief of Fox Lake Cree Nation. He was later honored by the Gillam Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Kiowa and Tribal Council presented him with a star blanket and an eagle feather. Every patch on the quilt, he was told, represents a person, and it means you are surrounded by those who love, support, and will protect you. The Assistant Commissioner, Kevin Hackett, reflecting on the case afterward, said it was one of the most dynamic and unpredictable investigations in his memory. There is a version of this story where Billy does not see the raven, where he keeps the boat moving, where the Nelson River holds Cam and Briar indefinitely, swallowed by the same wilderness that had swallowed every clue they dropped, every vehicle they burned, every road they drove down after the highway, where the families of China and Lucas and Leonard never receive the confirmation they needed, where the videos on Leonard's camera are never found. One raven, one man who knew what it meant. For nearly 3 weeks over the summer of 2019, what would become one of Canada's largest nationwide manhunts gripped the country and the world. It began with a broken-down van on a remote highway and a bearded man in the dark. It ended in a ravine off the Nelson River, 2 bodies in the brush, a camera full of cold footage, and a question that has never been answered. Why? There is no motive on record, no manifesto, no ideology publicly confirmed, no specific target, no personal connection between the killers and any of their victims that has ever been established. 3 people were on the wrong road at the wrong time, and 2 teenagers with a semi-automatic rifle and 20 rounds of ammunition decided to use them. The families, friends, and loved ones of China, Deese, Lucas Fowler, and Leonard Dick have described the loss as profound. They have asked, consistently, that the people they loved be remembered for how they lived, for the kindness, for the generosity, for the adventure and the curiosity and the love they put into the world before the world took them back. A young woman who worked on a grape farm in Europe and saved everything she earned so she could keep moving. A young man who spent 2 years backpacking through every country he could reach, who fixed up a van so he could drive his girlfriend through Canada to Alaska. A botany professor who wrote short plays and played guitar and went looking for grizzlies alone because the wilderness had always been where he felt most like himself. 3 people who were doing exactly what they loved. China's mother still watches the gas station footage. She still sees something new in it every time. She still hears them in that embrace, arms around each other at the fuel pump, saying what people say when they have no idea it is the last time. Let's do this. Here we go. On the afternoon of the 11th of May 2022, 5-year-old Mariah was laughing and chatting leisurely, finishing a hamburger with an old friend at a neighborhood restaurant in Austin, Texas. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. She was a renowned cyclist who had traveled a long distance from San Francisco to this city to participate in a race that weekend. She was with someone she trusted. She was heading back to a friend's house. She had no idea that someone was watching her from the shadows. She never made it to race day. When her friend Caitlin Cash returned home that evening, Mariah Wilson was dead, lying on the bathroom floor in a pool of her own blood, shot multiple times in the back of the head. The killer had acted quickly, precisely. This was not a random robbery gone wrong. This was a meticulously planned, cold-blooded execution driven by jealousy, obsession, and a possessive rage that had been quietly building for months inside someone who had smiled through every dinner and slept next to someone every night without giving any outward sign of what she was truly capable of. In the cycling community, Mariah Wilson was known simply as Mo. She was from Vermont, based in San Francisco, and she traveled with her racing bike the way most people travel with a carry-on. It was simply part of who she was. A $14,000 carbon racing machine that she brought everywhere she competed. She had come to Austin for a weekend race. She had done this before. She would arrive, stay with her friend Caitlin Cash on Maple Avenue, race, and leave. It was a routine. It was safe. What Mo did not know, what almost no one in that community fully understood, was that her history with one particular person had made her a target inside a story she did not even know she was part of. Colin Strickland was a professional cyclist. Tall, competitive, the kind of person who fills a room without trying to. He and Mo had crossed paths years earlier and had stayed in contact. In October of 2021, during a brief period when his relationship with his girlfriend Caitlin Armstrong had fractured and she had moved most of her things out, he and Mo had spent a week together. A month-long romantic chapter that both of them understood to be exactly what it was: temporary, honest, uncomplicated. Then Caitlin came back. Colin went back to her. Mo returned to San Francisco. But Colin and Mo stayed in touch. Text messages. The occasional meetup when she was in Austin. Friendly, easy. The kind of connection that exists between 2 people who genuinely like each other without any particular agenda. Caitlin Armstrong saw it differently. She had a pattern that Colin had quietly learned to navigate around. She checked his phone. She tracked who he was talking to. When Mo's name appeared in his messages too frequently, he had done something that seemed small at the time, but would later mean everything. He changed Mo's contact name in his phone. Not to something obvious. Just something neutral, something that would not start a fight. In retrospect, that single action tells you everything about the temperature inside that house. A man who changes a contact name to avoid an argument is a man who already knows the argument is dangerous. He knew, he just did not know how dangerous. On May 11th, Colin and Mo had spent the afternoon together. They went swimming. They went to a bar called Pool Burger for drinks and food as the sun began to drop. It was described later as a lovely evening. An awesome evening, Colin would say. Getting cool, getting dark, the kind of evening that feels like everything is exactly right. Around 8:30 p.m., he dropped Mo off at Maple Avenue. He texted Caitlin on the way home, something casual. Hey, are you still out getting food? She texted back eventually, said she had been at a laser hair removal appointment downtown at 7 p.m., said she had done yoga after that. She came home around 9:20 in a yoga outfit, carrying a yoga mat. Colin thought nothing of it. Caitlin Cash came home at roughly the same time, 2 minutes before she called 911. What she found when she walked in would not leave her. A friend on the bathroom floor, blood on her face, blood on the back of her head, not moving. The fear in her voice does not build. It is already there, full and raw, from the first word she speaks. She has walked into something no one prepares for, and the only thing she can do is keep talking, keep answering, keep hoping someone arrives before it stops mattering.
What's the address of the emergency?
It's 1708 Maple Avenue.
Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
My friend is staying with me, and I just walked in, and she's laying on the bathroom floor, and there's blood everywhere, and I don't know what happened.
Is she awake?
She's not awake. There's blood all over her face and all on the back of her head.
Is she breathing?
No, she's not breathing.
I've got the paramedics on the way to help you. Stay on the line, Caitlin.
The paramedics were already on the way. It did not matter. The officers who arrived at the scene found something worse than a crime in progress. They found a crime that was already complete. What the bullets had done to Mariah Wilson was not survivable. Cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that surrounds and protects the brain, had leaked onto the floor. The shots had pierced her skull. She was gone before anyone walked through that door. The officers who arrived at Maple Avenue that night did what trained investigators do. They assessed. They contained. They asked questions of the only person present, Caitlin Cash, and they began reconstructing the hours before. Mo had gone swimming with a friend named Colin. She had been dropped off. Caitlin had gone to dinner and come back. The house was a single entry point. There was no sign of forced entry. There was, however, one notable absence, a $14,000 racing bike. Mo had brought it to Austin specifically for the weekend race. Caitlin Cash told officers it would have been right inside the front door, the kind of thing you lean against the wall the moment you come home. Riders never leave their bikes outside. It is too valuable, too personal. It was gone. The initial theory assembled itself quickly. Someone had known the bike was in that house. Someone had waited until Mo was alone. A robbery gone wrong, a target of opportunity. Maybe she resisted. Maybe she tried to fight back. Officers began sweeping the nearby area, including a wooded stretch close to the house. Within minutes, they found the bike. Dumped, hidden badly, left in a spot that was almost designed to be found. The conversation at the crime scene carries the strange double quality of all early police work, the procedural, and the devastating running alongside each other. Cash is still processing what she found. The officer is already building a timeline. Between the two of them, a name keeps surfacing.
Do you know if he's talking to anyone or any friends? I know you say you don't live here.
Yeah, no, she was with her friend Colin.
Colin?
Yeah.
What is that?
Colin Strickland.
Colin Strickland?
Strickland, yeah. Yeah. They went swimming.
Okay.
Did you see a gun or anything like that in there when you were in
Colin? You said Colin Strickland. Strickland? Okay.
Yeah.
And you know where Colin Strickland is?
No, but I have his phone number. I can call him.
Or I can give you his phone number. Information from you. You said, so she went swimming with Colin Strickland?
Went swimming. I left to go have dinner with my friends, and then I came back. Yeah, this is my house. This is your house. This is my house. She's staying with me.
Colin Strickland's name was now in the air. He was the last person confirmed to have been with Mo. His number was in Cash's phone. And when officers began following the thread of what had happened in the hours before the murder, Colin moved from witness to person of interest almost instantly. But the bike changed everything. When investigators found it dumped in the woods nearby, the robbery theory collapsed. A real robber, someone motivated by the value of that bike, would not leave it 2 blocks away. They would move it, fence it, disappear with it. Leaving it close to the scene meant only one thing. The bike was never the point. The bike was the misdirection. Someone had wanted police to chase the robbery angle long enough for them to establish distance from the real motive. This was not impulsive. This was planned. Officers moved fast. The neighborhood had cameras, doorbell devices, ring systems mounted to front porches up and down the street. When investigators pulled the footage and played it back, they found what they were looking for, and it was not what any of them expected. A black Jeep. Caught on camera driving directly toward the Maple Avenue address in the minutes surrounding the time of death. Moving in, moving out. And then, attached to that discovery, something that shifted the entire investigation. The footage of a doorbell camera picking up audio in the moments before the shot. A sound no one on that street had reported hearing. But it was there. Compressed and small and devastating on playback. And immediately after the Jeep left, officers now had a vehicle. They did not have a plate. The image was too grainy. The distance was too great. But they had a description, and they had a lead. Colin Strickland. 2 days after the murder, when officers went to Colin's home to question him directly, they saw something parked in his driveway. A black Jeep. The first conversation with Colin Strickland was choreographed the way all early suspect interviews are: casual framing, indirect questions, the appearance of information gathering rather than accusation. Officers wanted two things from him: confirmation of his alibi and whatever he knew about who else might have motive. He was cooperative. He answered questions about the evening. He placed himself at Poolburger with Mo until around 8:30. He had texted to support the timeline. He had dropped her off and driven home. He confirmed he had texted Caitlin on his way back. Then he offered something he perhaps did not intend to offer quite so cleanly. He mentioned Caitlin's evening, the laser hair removal appointment, the yoga class, the outfit she came home in, mat in hand, around 9:20. What he could not tell them was where exactly she had done yoga, which studio, which class. He did not know. He had not asked. He assumed when officers quietly ran the plates on the black Jeep in the driveway, the car came back registered to Caitlin Armstrong. Not Colin. Caitlin. Colin Strickland is describing the night of May 11th the way a man describes a night he believes was ordinary. He is not lying. He genuinely does not know yet what he is being asked to reconstruct or why the details of Caitlin's evening are suddenly the most important thing in the room.
Where had she been? Like that whole...
She had actually a laser hair removal appointment, she said, at 7 p.m. downtown. And then after that, I'm not exactly sure. She had texted me asking if I wanted to meet up, and I didn't reply. And then I didn't see her or hear from her until I was back at home.
And did she say anything like whenever she got home of like where she'd been?
No, but she was in her like a yoga outfit, carrying a yoga mat.
She was in her yoga outfit, carrying a yoga mat. It is the kind of detail that sounds like innocence. It is the kind of detail that, in context, sounds like preparation. The investigation turned on a single, growing realization. Caitlin Armstrong had no verified alibi for the window in which Mariah Wilson was killed. She had told Colin she had a laser hair removal appointment. She had her phone turned off during a critical stretch of time. And her Jeep, the Jeep she owned, the Jeep she drove, had been captured on surveillance cameras moving toward the Maple Avenue address at the exact moment Mo was murdered. A warrant check on Caitlin produced a hit, a minor theft of service issue, a Class B infraction, something small enough to be meaningless on its own, but it was enough to bring her in without alerting her to the real reason. Officers brought Caitlin Armstrong into the station under the pretense of the warrant. The interrogation that followed was one of the most delicate and ultimately consequential conversations in the entire case. The detective's tone is deliberate, almost breezy, as though this is paperwork, as though they have simply crossed paths over an administrative inconvenience. Caitlin Armstrong does not sound relaxed. She sounds like someone measuring every word before she releases it.
If I have an existing warrant and you don't know what it's about, do I need an attorney here?
So the warrant is just a Class B, just theft of service type thing. The reason I'm here is because your name came up during a conversation with Colin. I think there's a lot more information that you have that can kind of explain some of the stuff he's saying. But to be able to do that, I have to read you your rights, just so that you know and you're protected and things like that, okay?
Okay, and so if you're reading me my rights, then I should
That's because of the warrant, because you're under arrest for the warrant. So you're technically in custody because of that warrant.
She is asking the right question. She knows it. The detective knows it. And what happens next is the moment the entire case nearly unravels. The warrant was wrong. Not voidable. Not contested. Wrong. The date of birth on file did not match Caitlin Armstrong's date of birth. Technically, legally, it belonged to a different person, which meant that the one thread officers had used to pull her into that room had just dissolved in their hands. The detective delivers the news with the practiced lightness of someone trying to prevent a door from closing. But Caitlin Armstrong already understands exactly what this means. The power in that room has just shifted completely.
So that's what they were just knocking on the door, is apparently that warrant, the date of birth was wrong. So it had your name, but the date of birth is wrong. So it's to a different person. So you're not under arrest, okay?
Okay.
I know, it's a little crazy. But I would really like to talk to you and clear some stuff up because Colin did bring your name up. And I think there's a lot more information that you have that can kind of clear some stuff up. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I feel like I should have an attorney present.
So that's totally your choice. So at this point, you are free to leave at any point. So this is going to be consensual at this point because you're not under arrest, okay?
She is free to leave. She knows it. The detective knows it. And for a moment, the entire investigation hangs on whether one woman in a police interview room decides to stay or walk. She does not stay. But before she goes, the detective makes one final attempt. One last card played across the table to see if anything shows on Caitlin Armstrong's face. The detective tells her that Colin mentioned some tension, that there were issues between her and this girl, that her story could clear things up if she just explained herself. Caitlin Armstrong listens. She does not flinch. She says that is not accurate. She says she does not know exactly what he could have said. She says she does not actually know whether Colin had been spending time with this woman recently. And then the detective drops the one piece of evidence they were holding. By this point, Caitlin Armstrong has already invoked her right to an attorney once. She has already been told she is free to go. What the detective does next threads a wire along the edge of what is legally permissible, not crossing it, but leaning hard into it, watching to see if the weight of what she says next makes anything crack.
So that's what they were just knocking on the door, is apparently that warrant, the date of birth was wrong. So it had your name, but the date of birth is wrong. So it's to a different person. So you're not under arrest, okay?
Okay.
I know, it's a little crazy. But I would really like to talk to you and clear some stuff up because Colin did bring your name up. And I think there's a lot more information that you have that can kind of clear some stuff up. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I feel like I should have an attorney present.
So that's totally your choice. So at this point, you are free to leave at any point. So this is going to be consensual at this point because you're not under arrest, okay?
She knows about the death, Colin told her. She was already carrying that information into this room when they brought her in. And yet she sat down. She answered questions. She measured every syllable. She has not broken. She will not break here. What the detective says next is a calculated detonation, placed as gently as possible into the center of the conversation, hoping the blast radius catches something on its way out.
And your vehicle was seen next to her house, and we needed to talk about that, okay? Because when he's saying this stuff and then your vehicle is seen, I want to be able to explain, okay, there's a logical explanation for this. Maybe you were upset and you were just in the area or something. I don't know, because I don't have your story. When I can't explain that and all I see is that your vehicle's over there, that kind of makes it look not too good, right? Okay. And then when we're talking to Colin and we're hearing yeah, there was some jealousy stuff going on, that doesn't sound very good. And so that's why I really want to get your side of the story, because maybe there's a lot more going on.
I would like to leave if I'm free to leave.
Okay.
6 words. Flat. Final. I would like to leave. There is nothing more the detective can do. Caitlin Armstrong stands up, and she walks out of the Austin Police Department, and officers watch her go. They are more certain of her guilt in that moment than they have been of anything else in this investigation, and they cannot touch her. The case did not stall. It accelerated. Officers went back to Colin Strickland a second time. This time, he brought his attorney. The conversation was more guarded, more careful, the edges of every answer slightly sanded down. But what Colin gave them, perhaps without fully realizing how significant it was a picture of Caitlin Armstrong that no surveillance camera could have provided. He gave them the interior life of a relationship that had been quietly corroding for months. He talked about the breakup period, about how he and Mo had spent that week together while Caitlin was technically moving out, her things still in his house, sleeping in separate rooms. He talked about how Caitlin had gone on dates during that time, how she had been on Bumble, how he had assumed they were both moving on. He said he found it strange that she would be obsessed with Mo when she herself had been seeing other people. He said it like a man who has genuinely not connected the dots, like a man who has lived alongside jealousy so long he no longer recognizes its shape. Then the interview moved to a detail that had been sitting quietly in the evidence log since the beginning. Colin is describing Caitlin Armstrong the way people describe someone they loved, with the specific grammar of someone who is simultaneously defending her and reckoning with what they are being asked. His answers are not evasions. They are the honest words of a man who did not see this coming and is not yet ready to fully believe it arrived.
How was your wife? Well, yeah, I'm going to tell you, yeah, she's always happy, but does she get mad? Yes, everybody gets mad. That's natural. I'm not going to blow that out of proportion. Do I think that my wife could go and kill somebody? No. There's no way in the world. Do I think my wife would hit somebody? No. Now, if you ask me that about my 6-year-old son, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he wouldn't punch somebody at all.
I think Caitlin would hit somebody. No, I honestly don't, because it would be too. I don't know. Do I think Caitlin could kill somebody? No, I don't.
He says it with conviction. And that conviction, the genuine, unperformed certainty of it, is perhaps the most heartbreaking thing recorded in that room. Because by the time this interview was conducted, Mariah Wilson had already been dead for days. The detective pushes further. Not cruelly, but with the precision of someone who needs to hear the answer stated plainly, for the record, so that later there is no ambiguity about what Colin Strickland believed about the woman he lived with.
Has she ever mentioned in the past of wanting to hurt Mo?
No, she's never mentioned wanting to physically hurt.
Okay. Do you think that she is capable?
If I thought she was physically capable of hurting another human, I would have extricated myself immediately from that situation. Not only not so much for my own personal safety, but my concern for another human.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that answer?
The answer is no.
Okay.
I don't believe in any way she's capable of that.
Okay.
He would have left. He says it without hesitation. If he had believed for a single moment that Caitlin Armstrong was capable of violence, he would have removed himself from that relationship not only for himself, but out of concern for others. He is telling the truth, it just was not enough. And then the conversation arrives at the detail that connects everything. The shell casings found on the bathroom floor at Maple Avenue had been cataloged and sent to ballistics. The caliber had been identified. All that remained was finding the weapon. What Colin says next gives investigators the thread they need to pull.
The gun range that she visited with her sister, do you know where that gun range is?
I think it was on South I-35. I told them to go to the Reds, which is now something else, which is the one I drove past on my way to school for 12 years at the Waldorf school. But they went to another one because a mutual friend had been there.
You bought the guns, right?
I bought the guns, yes.
When was that?
I think early December.
Okay.
There's a receipt with them. I'm sure you could look at the receipt.
He bought the guns. In December of 2021, 1 month after he and Caitlin got back together, 1 month after Mo returned to San Francisco. He bought them for home protection, he said. He had recommended a specific range. Caitlin had gone to a different one with her sister. She had practiced. She had learned. And when ballistics compared the caliber of the weapon Colin had purchased to the shell casings recovered from Mariah Wilson's bathroom floor, they matched. The evidence had assembled itself into something that left almost no room for alternative explanation. Caitlin Armstrong's Jeep on the surveillance cameras. Her phone turned off during the critical window. Her movements on the night of May 11th entirely unaccounted for during the hours between the laser hair removal appointment and the moment she arrived home in yoga clothes with a mat under her arm. The gun, purchased by Colin, owned by both of them, matching the caliber of the bullets that killed Mo. The bike, dumped nearby as a staged red herring. The contact name change in Colin's phone that told investigators everything about the temperature of that relationship without anyone having to say it out loud. And Caitlin's own behavior inside that interrogation room, the careful language, the immediate request for an attorney, the flat refusal to explain where she had been, the 6 words that ended the interview and confirmed to every officer present that she was not confused or frightened, she was contained, she was managing. Officers moved to arrest her, She was already gone. The passport she used at Austin Bergstrom International Airport did not belong to her. It belonged to her sister. Same general appearance, different identity. It was enough to get through. A one-way ticket to Costa Rica, booked in advance, found when investigators obtained a search warrant for her Gmail records. CCTV footage from the airport confirmed what the records showed. Caitlin Armstrong boarding a flight out of the country hours before officers arrived at her home with a warrant for her arrest. She had booked a hostel in Santa Teresa Beach. She had established herself as a yoga instructor in the local community. She had changed her appearance surgically, aggressively, in ways that went well beyond a new haircut. By the time officers were closing in on her location in Costa Rica, she had undergone several procedures to alter how she looked. It was not enough. The officer who had been assigned to locate her sent a message through local social media channels asking for a yoga instructor in the area. Someone responded. Someone agreed to meet. The arresting officer recognized her from her eyes. Caitlin Armstrong was taken into custody, transported back to the United States, and charged with the murder of Mariah Wilson. She escaped again. Once more, briefly, in October of 2023, she leveraged a medical appointment outside of the jail, slipped through a bathroom window, and ran. She was caught within minutes. There was nowhere left to go. The trial assembled the evidence piece by piece. The surveillance footage of the Jeep, the cell phone data mapping her movements on May 11th, the ballistic analysis matching the gun to the shell casings on the floor where Mo died, the testimony of Colin Strickland, who told the jury what he had told the detectives, that he had never believed her capable of this, that he would have left if he had known that he was wrong. The jury was not wrong. On November 16th, 2023, Caitlin Armstrong was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison. There is a detail from that final evening that does not appear in any of the surveillance footage because no camera was positioned to catch it. It is the moment Colin Strickland dropped Mo off at the Maple Avenue address, 8:30 in the evening, just as the light was going. He said later, "It had been an awesome evening, getting cool, getting dark, the kind of evening that feels like everything is exactly right." He drove away. He texted Caitlin. He went home. Mo walked through the front door of the house where she was staying and closed it behind her. She did not know that a black Jeep had been following them through the streets of Austin. She did not know that someone had been watching their afternoon from a distance, tracking the swimming, the burger, the drive home. She did not know that the same person who had been in Colin's house when she visited Austin in October, the person who had been moving out technically while Colin and Mo were spending time together, had spent months constructing a version of that week that made Mo the reason for everything that was broken. She did not know any of it. She just came home. Caitlin Cash, her friend, the one who found her, the one who made the 911 call with her voice already breaking, she has carried that 2 minutes since May of 2022. The walk through the front door, the bathroom, the floor. The trial gave her a verdict. It gave her an explanation. It gave her the name of the person who did it and the length of the sentence they received. It did not give her back what she lost when she came home that night. Mariah Wilson came to Austin for a bike race. She had done it before. She would have done it again. She was staying with a friend in a house she knew, with a routine she had repeated without incident. She had spent the afternoon doing something she loved with someone she trusted. She had walked through a door. The cameras caught it all. Every second of the approach, the arrival, the escape, thousands of hours of footage, cross-referenced, time-stamped, presented to a jury that watched it frame by frame. They caught everything. Mo was already gone. 90 years is the number the court assigned to what was taken. It is a large number. It is also just a number. What it represents, the planning, the staging, the gun purchase months earlier, the fake passport, the surgical alterations, the escape to another country. The second escape from a jail bathroom window is a portrait of someone who believed that she could make the world bend around what she wanted it to be. The world did not bend. Mariah Wilson's name is spoken now in the same breath as the verdict, the sentence, the case file. She is remembered in a community of riders who knew her as Mo, a woman who traveled with a $14,000 bike because the sport was simply part of who she was, who came to Austin to race and stayed with a friend and spent an evening that felt like everything was exactly right. She did not get to race that weekend. But her name is still in the record. The case number, the verdict, the 90 years, all of it attached to her. All of it. In the end, a permanent and public accounting of what she was worth, which was everything. And somewhere in Austin, on a street with cameras mounted to every porch, the evening light still drops at the same angle it did on May 11th, 2022. Still gets cool at the same hour. Still turns that specific shade of dark that Colin Strickland once called an awesome evening. The cameras are still recording.